Han Li didn't immediately procure those two balls of glacial flames. Instead, he cocked his head to the side and fell into deep thought. A thought suddenly occurred to him as he turned back to glance at the unbroken sink devils, then down at the two balls of glacial flames again. All of a sudden, he seemed to have reached some sort of conclusion with his thoughts and abruptly burst into laughter. His boisterous laughter echoed throughout the entire cave. Han Li's laughter tapered off as he murmured to himself, "Fantastic! This journey was definitely not a waste of time." He waved his hand downward, upon which the two balls of glacial flames were drawn toward him by an invisible force. Han Li unleashed countless thin golden arcs of light amid the sound of rumbling thunderclaps, encapsulating those two balls of glacial flames in golden balls of thread, as well, before stowing them away into profound jade boxes. After doing all that, Han Li released that black jade vial from his sleeve and uttered a chant to get the unbroken sink devils sealed back into the vial. The five devils seemed to be aware of Han Li's intentions, and they were trying to stall for time, clearly unwilling to return to the vial. Han Li's expression darkened as he let loose a stern cry. He pointed a finger toward the five devils, and the silver rings on their bodies immediately shuddered as azure spiritual light erupted. The five devils had been afflicted by the might of those rings more than once, and they immediately followed Han Li's command, emitting a ghostly cry as they transformed into 5 bursts of gray-white qi before entering the vial. Only then did Han Li carefully stow the vial back into his sleeve. As for the humanoid puppet off to the side, Han Li didn't appear to have any intention of stowing it away. Instead, he pulled out a green high-grade spirit stone and slapped it onto the puppet, replacing the other spirit stone that was about to be exhausted of energy. As long as the puppet wasn't fighting at full power, its draining effect on spirit stones was completely negligible. His body flashed through the air and he descended gently, landing in front of a large rock amid a pile of rubble. There were some relatively large fragments of myriad-year glacial jade embedded into the rock, and they were shimmering with a faint white light. Han Li raised an eyebrow as he patted his storage pouch, upon which a thin and long beaker appeared in his hand. He tapped the beaker and the lid flew off by itself. The beaker then tilted slightly, and a large clump of pitch-black liquid spilled out from within, emanating bursts of gray qi. It was completely identical to the yin spirit water used by Bai Mengxin to extract the myriad-year glacial jade. This liquid was some dark water that Han Li had procured after unintentionally stumbling into the Umbra realm. He had thought that this dark water appeared to be quite interesting at the time, so he brought back quite a lot with him using several containers. During his free time thereafter, he had conducted some research on this liquid. However, he discovered that aside from the fact that they were quite viscous and cold temporarily imbue a treasure with yin flames, he didn't discover any other use for them. As such, they had been stored in his storage pouch this entire time. Only after entering the profound jade cave and witnessing Bai Mengxin extract the myriad-year glacial jade, did he realize that her so-called yin spirit water was completely identical to this dark water. In the presence of Master Arctic Dragon and the others, he didn't take the risk to use his spiritual sense to assess whether those two were indeed one and the same. However, he was adamant that they were the exact same thing. As for the name, Dark Water, that was simply a name that the cultivator in the Umbra realm had given to the liquid. Now that he was the only person left in the profound glacial cave, he was naturally going to test out his theory. Han Li pointed at the clump of black liquid, and the liquid slowly flew into the air above the rock. It then shuddered slightly before a drop detached from its overall mass, disappearing into the white light below in the blink of an eye. Sure enough, this situation was completely identical to the situation encountered by Bai Mengxin when procuring the jade. The black liquid disappeared into the profound jade in a flash, and at the same time, a layer of gray qi emerged. Han Li was very pleased to see this as he flicked a finger toward the profound jade. All of a sudden, a small bead of azure light shot forth and struck the profound jade. A faint thud was heard, and the profound jade wobbled slightly before detaching itself from the rock, and was sucked into his hand. He examined the profound jade in his hand with an intense gaze before looking around at all of the spots of white light shimmering within the cave. A faint smile gradually surfaced on his face. With the amount of dark water he was carrying with him, it would naturally be impossible to extract all of the profound jade in the cave. However, it was definitely not a problem to extract the majority of the profound jade revealed on the surface of the cave. With that in mind, Han Li immediately patted his storage pouch to produce another beaker, which he passed to the humanoid puppet beside him. The puppet accepted the container soundlessly, and its body flashed through the air several times, taking it to another location in the cave. It summoned the dark water from within the beaker while holding a storage pouch in its other hand as it began to extract profound jade. Meanwhile, Han Li was doing the same thing. Time slowly passed by, and several hours later, the profound jade's glacial qi in the cave had gradually become a lot thinner. Furthermore, the spots of white light that had riddled the entire cave had also dwindled significantly, with less than a third of the original amount remaining. After Han Li applied his final drop of dark water onto a fragment of profound jade and stowed the latter away in his storage pouch, he let loose a faint sigh as he looked around with a forlorn expression. If he had known that this dark water would have such an amazing effect, he would have definitely carried more out of the Umbra realm with him. Even so, the amount of myriad-year profound jade that he had procured was already quite jaw-dropping. Just the myriad-year profound jade fragments procured by him alone numbered in excess of 1,000. It was a pity that some of the large pieces of profound jade required more than one drop of yin spirit water to be applied for extraction. Otherwise, he would have been able to procure even more than what he currently had. Just as he was thinking this to himself, the humanoid puppet suddenly flashed through the air and traveled toward him. It then raised a hand and tossed its bulging storage pouch at him. Han Li caught the pouch and used his spiritual sense to take a cursory glance at its contents. Sure enough, there appeared to also be over 1,000 pieces of profound jade in there. With so many pieces of profound jade in his possession, Han Li was already beginning to devise a plan. Aside from adding them to his 72 flying swords, he could use them to refine some treasures or perhaps add them into his existing treasures to enhance their powers. However, even if Han Li were to do all that, there was no way he would be able to use up all of this profound jade. The majority of the profound jade would still remain, and he was going to use its glacial qi to refine and purify his own glacial flames. After all, with the assistance of the profound jade's glacial qi, refining his glacial flames should become a lot easier. Han Li didn't think too deep into this matter. The train of thought only briefly surfaced in his mind before it was abandoned. He put away the storage pouch before turning toward the fire raven formed from the gradient true flame. The fire raven had already swelled to become 5 to 6 times larger than its original size, making it roughly comparable in size to human head. In contrast, the killing silhouette was completely unrecognizable, having been reduced to a thin layer of white that enveloped the fire raven. The profound jade badge had also ended up caught between the fire raven's beak, and the latter was using the former as a toy. Han Li faltered upon seeing this, before hurriedly waving his hand through the air with a bemused expression. The profound jade badge immediately extricated itself from between the fire raven's beak and landed in his hand. Without the support of the profound jade badge, the remaining white qi instantly dispersed and was about to vanish. The fire raven immediately let loose a low cry upon seeing this. It spread open its wings, and its entire body transformed into a ball of crimson flames, which swept toward the remaining white qi, absorbing all of it into its own body. After doing all that, the flames reverted back to their fire raven form and landed on Han Li's shoulder after circling the air with excitement. It then cocked its head to the sides and used its beak to organize its fiery feathers, which had become even more exuberant in color. Han Li turned to appraise the fire raven, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. The gradient true flame's spiritual nature had been enhanced significantly. He looked down at the profound jade badge in his hand, and a thought seemed to have occurred to him as he feigned a grabbing motion with his other hand. All of a sudden, a wisp of profound jade's glacial qi appeared in his hand, and the former was enveloped in a ball of purple apex flames. A blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he could clearly see that the glacial qi within the purple flames was no longer in its wispy substantial stage. Instead, it had become extremely thin and insubstantial, no different from normal glacial qi. A sense of enlightenment welled up in Han Li's heart as he examined the profound jade badge again. He then clicked his tongue with wonder before stowing the treasure into his storage pouch. After searching through the entire profound jade cave and ascertaining that there was nothing else of value to be contained, he departed with the humanoid puppet and the fire raven. The entrance to the cave was still tightly sealed. Han Li looked at the mysterious runes flashing at the opening and summoned the celestial blue cauldron from his sleeve. The cauldron shot forth through the air and rotated a few times before hovering in front of him, completely stationary. If it were any other cultivator, they really would be unable to manipulate this cauldron. After all, it was quite clear that only those who had celestial ice flames could control the celestial blue cauldron. That was why Master Arctic Dragon had willingly given one to the monk. However, this was not an issue for Han Li. He took an indifferent glance at the cauldron before making a hand seal, upon which the purple apex flames around his body shuddered and began to change drastically in color. In the blink of an eye, the layer of purple flames over his body had turned blue, transforming into celestial blue flames. Blue light was shimmering over his hand as he pointed at the small cauldron in front of him. A wisp of blue flames flew forth like a spirit snake and struck the cauldron with unerring accuracy. The celestial blue cauldron immediately tremored as it began to emit a ringing sound. Countless bursts of blue flames erupted from within as the cauldron began to swell drastically in size amid the blue light. Han Li made a hand seal to urge the cauldron into growth, only stopping when it had expanded to around 30 to 40 feet in size. Han Li then made another hand seal as a low cry escaped from his mouth. The massive cauldron immediately flew through the air, appearing as if it were going to crash through the opening of the cave. However, Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged. As expected, when the cauldron had reached around 30 to 40 feet away from the opening, the mysterious runes there flashed in unison as spiritual light of all types of colors radiated through the air. Those runes seemed to have been drawn to the massive cauldron as they transformed into countless streaks of light before disappearing into the blue flames around the cauldron. A loud rumbling erupted as a rift, several tens of feet in length, slowly appeared in the opening. Han Li left through the gap that had opened up with the humanoid puppet and the fire raven before appearing above the spirit void hall's altar. He waved his hand behind him without even turning around, and the celestial blue cauldron flew toward him, quickly shrinking once again before flying into his sleeve. A loud burst of rumbling erupted as the profound jade cave sealed over again. Han Li turned to look around him to discover that there was no one in the general vicinity, identical to the situation when he had entered the profound jade cave. He heaved a faint sigh of relief, but his brows then furrowed at the sight of the tall ice pillars on the altar before him. This frigid soul-freeze formation was going to be quite troublesome to deal with. The glacial chi within the formation wasn't going to pose much of a threat to him, but even so, breaking the formation would not be an easy task. After all, this formation wasn't some kind of temporary formation. It was an ancient spell formation in all its glory, without any of its power blunted or discounted in any way. Furthermore, what Han Li was more concerned about was not this formation, but instead how to open the gate of the Spirit Void Hall. Back when he had first come in, Master Arctic Dragon had told him that opening the gate from the inside would be a simple task. However, it was quite clear now that his words had been deceitful in nature. Even if it were indeed a simple task to open the gate from the inside, a special celestial technique would most likely be required. With that in mind, Han Li didn't immediately tackle the frigid soul-freeze formation. Instead, he patted his storage pouch, and a stack of formation banners radiating all different colors of spiritual light appeared in his hands. He hurled the banners downward and they disappeared in a flash, vanishing into a certain spot on the altar. A ball of white mist then emerged from that spot, encompassing a radius of over 100 feet. Han Li flipped over his palm upon seeing this to produce the vial treasure, within which Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul was sealed. After contemplating what he was going to do next, he decided to use a soul search technique on the nascent soul first to extract more information about the Spirit Void Hall, in order to prevent falling into some type of predicament due to his lack of knowledge. Of course, he was also going to search for information regarding the Purisun Flame essence. Thus, Han Li slowly descended with the vial in his hand. His body disappeared into the mist in the blink of an eye, and the entire Spirit Void Hall fell silent, with only the mist in the formation tumbling incessantly. A full 2 hours later, the white mist in the formation suddenly shuddered violently before quickly thinning at a rate perceptible to the naked eye. After most of the mist had vanished, Han Li's figure was revealed again, standing at the center of the formation. He wore a thoughtful expression on his face as he sat on the ground with his legs folded in front of him. His brows were tightly furrowed as if he were pondering a difficult problem, and the jade vial containing Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul sat beside him. However, the vial had been opened, yet the nascent soul was nowhere to be seen. Han Li's brows finally smoothed out as he murmured to himself, Who would have thought that the purest sun flame essence would be in such a place? It appears that I really shouldn't take the risk to go and find it before I reach the late nascent soul stage. It's interesting that there are 3 entrances to the Spirit Void Hall, yet only one exit in the main hall. Looks like this Master Arctic Dragon never planned to let me leave from the beginning. If I hadn't searched his soul, I would have been in trouble. He then rose to his feet as a vast expanse of azure light swept forth, collecting all of the formation banners as well as that empty vial. He made a hand seal and transformed into a streak of azure light as he flew toward a certain gate. The azure light receded, and Han Li was revealed standing in front of the gate. He looked at the sealing talismans on the gate, which were clearly quite antiquated, then glanced at the Gradian fire raven on his shoulder. The fire raven let loose a low cry and spread open its wings at his behest, sending 2 bursts of crimson flames hurtling through the air. The talismans up ahead immediately ignited upon making contact with the crimson flame. At the same time, spiritual light of all types of different colors appeared. However, those lights only flashed for a split second before instantly dimming. In the blink of an eye, all of the talismans were covered in a layer of ice. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he flicked his fingers, upon which several bursts of golden light shot forth, creating a quick succession of crisp thuds. The layer of ice on the surface of the talismans were shattered before being reduced to nothingness. Han Li stroked his chin and casually whipped his sleeve through the air, upon which a stiff gale swept toward the stone gate. The gate was slowly opened amid a rumbling noise. Han Li immediately strode in without any hesitation, while the humanoid puppet followed close behind him. After entering through this inconspicuous stone gate, they arrived in a large courtyard that was over 1,000 feet in width. There was a small winding path down the center, paved with white stones with beast statues of all different sizes lining the sides of the path. The statues were all snowy white and translucent, carved with exemplary craftsmen to create extremely lifelike renditions of beasts they were portraying. Upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered that all of these statues were created from profound jade, a discovery that caused a peculiar look to flash through his eyes. He then turned his attention away from the statues and began to walk down the path toward the gate at the path's conclusion. In the beginning, everything was normal. However, when he reached around the middle of the path, several tens of statues beside him suddenly sprang to life, bearing their fangs and claws with glacial chi erupting from their mouths as they pounced toward Han Li. Han Li seemed to have anticipated this well in advance, and he calmly produced a small fiery red cauldron. He pointed a finger at the cauldron, before making a hand seal in a calm and composed manner. A ringing sound immediately erupted from the cauldron as it flew into the air. A resounding boom then erupted as a pillar of fire over 100 feet in length sprang out from within. The entire space immediately became scorching hot, and all of the ice beasts faltered before cowering in fear. The ice beasts had been slowed down, but Han Li didn't stop there. He unleashed another celestial technique as the massive pillar of fire dispersed. Over 100 fire ravens that were roughly the size of fists emerged from the flames before flying toward the ice beasts, leaving clouds of fire in their wake. All of a sudden, the surrounding temperatures rose drastically once again, as the entire courtyard was inundated in a sea of crimson flames. These ice beasts were profound jade bodies, but these fire ravens were fire essence beings that had been refined for countless years within the cauldron. The ice beasts blasted glacial chi out of their mouths in a desperate attempt to save themselves, but were all invariably melted and disintegrated in the face of the scorching flames. Moments later, all of the ice beasts in the courtyard had disappeared. Han Li nodded with a satisfied look before flicking a finger toward the fire cauldron through the air. A crisp ringing sound was heard before all of the fire ravens swooped through the air and obediently flew back into the cauldron. After the lid of the cauldron was replaced, the fire cauldron fell silent again. Almost at the exact same moment, the sea of flames in the courtyard disappeared without a trace as if it had been nothing but a mirage. The fire raven standing on Han Li's shoulder wasn't very intrigued by the sight of its brethren. Instead, it continued to organize its feathers with its beak, as if it couldn't even be bothered to look at them. Han Li stowed away the fire cauldron before disappearing through the gate of the courtyard. Not long after that, he appeared in a hall that wasn't very large. Within this rather simple and crude hall, there was a small teleportation formation. Han Li was not surprised to see this. It appeared as if he already knew that there was a teleportation formation here. He clasped his hands behind his back and proceeded to make his way over to the formation for closer examination. However, right at this moment, white light suddenly flashed within the formation, and it was as if it had been activated, and that something was teleporting through it. Han Li was slightly taken aback to see this. However, as powerful as he was now, there was no need for him to fear anyone, even if another late-nascent soul cultivator from the North Night Palace or even the palace master herself were to emerge from the formation. Thus, he faltered in his footsteps and silently appraised the teleportation formation before him. In order to prepare for unforeseen circumstances, the humanoid puppet beside him had also instantly disappeared, concealing itself to survey the situation from the shadows. The teleportation formation before him wasn't very large, and it appeared that only 2 or 3 people could be teleported at a time at most. Sure enough, following a flash of white light, 3 slender figures stumbled out from within. Han Li narrowed his eyes and discovered that all 3 of them were young women in North Night Palace attire. They were roughly at the foundation establishment stage, and the eldest one among them had even reached the false core stage. However, all 3 female cultivators wore panicked expressions and were quite disheveled in appearance. One of them had sustained a severe injury on her shoulder, and it was quite clear that they had just endured a difficult battle. "Who are you?" "Ah, it's Senior Han." The 3 women were initially startled to see a man who wasn't in North Night Palace attire standing in front of the formation. The 2 women who were unscathed had each summoned a translucent flying sword, but the wounded woman was very elated to see Han Li. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing that. After taking a closer look at that female North Night Palace disciple, he discovered that she was the servant girl who had tended to him in the distinguished pavilion. "It's you, what happened?" Han Li asked with a calm expression. The other 2 women didn't know who this Senior Han was, but their junior martial sister seemed to be familiar with him, and he didn't appear to be an enemy, so they both heaved a collective sigh of relief. They then used their spiritual sense to detect Han Li's cultivation base, upon which elated expressions appeared on their faces. However, before the 2 women could extend a curtsy toward him, white light flashed in the teleportation formation again. A fishy odor then wafted forth as the silhouette of a massive beast appeared within the formation. This was an unidentifiable demon beast with a pair of horns and the head of a horse. It was wielding a green steel trident, and there was long black fur growing all over its back. The 3 women immediately hurtled back in retreat as the servant girl urgently cautioned, "Be careful, Senior. This is one of the demons that have attacked our palace and it's trying to kill us." A sinister smile appeared on the demon beast's face as soon as it caught sight of the 3 women, and it immediately made a charge for them. However, right at this moment, red light flashed behind the beast. Immediately thereafter, a massive explosion erupted before an azure figure appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye. A blood-curdling howl erupted from the demon beast's mouth as a gaping hole, the size of a fist, appeared in its chest. The sections around the puncture wound had been entirely charred black. The demon beast swayed a few times before letting go of its trident and falling to the ground. The servant girl knew that Han Li was a nascent soul cultivator, whom even the palace elders had to treat with respect. Even though it appeared that the one who had attacked wasn't Han Li himself, but they were definitely somehow related to Han Li. The other 2 female cultivators were also relieved to see such a powerful demon beast killed so easily. The false core stage female cultivator extended a respectful bow toward Han Li and said, "Thank you for saving us, Senior. These demon beasts have stormed into the main hall of our Spirit Void Hall. Please lend our palace your assistance, Senior." Han Li waved a sleeve through the air to summon a gust of gale-forced wind that swept the body of the demon beast out of the formation. He then turned to the female cultivators and asked, "They've stormed into the main hall. How did they break through all of the Spirit Void Hall's restrictions?" The woman hesitated momentarily before replying with a confused look on her face. "We aren't sure of the specific details, but we were patrolling the hall when we encountered a large horde of demon beasts. They seem to have somehow bypassed the restrictions outside the hall and infiltrated without being impeded." "I see. They must have used some sort of special method to access the hall then," Han Li murmured to himself. There were countless peculiar secret techniques and treasures in this world, so he had learned to expect the unexpected and wasn't overly surprised. Just as he was about to say something else, white light flashed within the teleportation formation again. The 3 North Night Palace cultivators were still startled upon seeing this, but they were a lot more assured with Han Li by their side. They merely took a couple of steps backward before focusing their eyes intently on the formation before them. The white light receded to reveal a woman with plain features who appeared to be just over 30 years of age. As soon as she appeared, she immediately unleashed a ring with a cautious look on her face to protect herself. However, her expression then faltered at the sight of Han Li and the three female disciples. She then caught sight of the body of the demon beast lying beside the formation and looked back at Han Li, upon which an elated look appeared on her face. "We pay our respects to Martial Aunt Yao." The three female cultivators were overjoyed to see this woman, and they immediately extended respectful salutes. The woman waved a hand at the three before making her way over to Han Li and extending a respectful salute of her own. "I pay my respects to Senior Han." "You know me?" Han Li looked at the woman with a peculiar expression. He had no idea who she was. "My name is Yao Man, and I once caught sight of Senior from afar while I was patrolling the palace," the woman replied respectfully. "I see," Han Li nodded in response. The woman continued in a respectful voice as she glanced toward the entrance to the hall. "Senior, are you with our palace elders? The demon beasts suddenly infiltrated the main hall of the Spirit Void Hall, and I've been ordered to seek out Grand Elder Arctic Dragon to request for his assistance." I'm afraid fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon won't be able to help you at the moment," Han Li replied with a smile. An urgent expression appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this. "I've also heard that Senior is doing something extremely important with our palace elders, but this demon beast invasion is a very serious matter. If the Grand Elder and the others do not step in, our North Night Palace could be razed to the ground." "Oh, is the demon beast invasion that severe this time? Isn't the palace master also a late nascent soul cultivator? Can't she take care of this matter?" Han Li asked with an intrigued look. "I am here at none other than the palace master's behest to request for assistance. Before I left, the palace master was engaged in battle with a powerful demon beast and was unable to attend to any matters other than her battle," the woman replied with a wry smile. "Fellow Taoist Arctic Dragon and the others have entered the profound Jade Cave. If you think you have a way to get them to come out and help you, then go ahead. I'm going to have a look and see just what demon beasts have infiltrated that would pose such a severe threat to the palace." Han Li's body flashed through the air, and he appeared in the teleportation formation. The woman faltered slightly upon hearing this, but she didn't dare to stop Han Li and could only offer words of caution. "Be careful, Senior. There are many demon beasts infiltrating on the other side, though the teleportation formation could send you to a perilous location." Han Li nodded and raised a hand, upon which an azure celestial technique struck the formation. White light immediately began to flash as teleportation was initiated. Right at this moment, silver light flashed behind Han Li and an azure humanoid figure appeared, seemingly from thin air, before both of them were teleported away. The woman was startled upon seeing this and asked, "Who was that?" The false core stage disciple hesitated momentarily before replying, "I'm not sure, but that demon beast over there seems to have been killed by that person. Heard many seniors from the outside world came to the palace this time. That man must have been one of them. You three wait here. If enemies teleport to this place, then do your best to hold them off for now. I'm going to enter the profound Jade Cave to see if I can recruit the help of the Grand Elder and the others." The woman was rather disturbed by the fact that Han Li appeared here by himself, but she quickly recalled that she had been entrusted with an important duty and rushed toward the cave. "Yes," the three female disciples bowed in unison, while the woman transformed into a streak of white light hurtling toward the profound Jade Cave. On the other side, Han Li and the humanoid puppet emerged from the teleportation formation. Before Han Li had even recovered from the discomfort brought on by teleportation, the puppet behind him suddenly disappeared on the spot. Two cries of anguish rang out in quick succession, followed by a dull thump as something fell to the ground. Han Li turned to discover a demon beast's body lying in a puddle of its own blood. There were a man and woman standing beside it, both of whom were core formation stage cultivators of the North Night Palace. They were staring at the humanoid puppet, which had one of its shiny golden arms protruding from the other demon beast's chest. The puppet withdrew its arm, and the demon beast's body also fell to the ground. They had arrived in an identical hall to the one that the other teleportation formation was situated. Han Li took a glance at the two North Night Palace disciples before striding away without paying them any heed. He could hear a series of loud clashes erupting from outside the hall, thereby indicating that extremely fierce battles were taking place outside. The man and woman were planning to make their way over to Han Li and extend respectful salutes. But Han Li clearly didn't want to speak to them, so they remained where they were after a brief hesitation. Right at this moment, Han Li and the humanoid puppet had already exited the hall. As expected, there were many intense battles taking place outside with a dozen or so North Night Palace disciples locked in combat with a horde of demon beasts. Treasures and demonic chi flew in all directions amid deafening roars and explosions. Both sides appeared to be evenly matched and were locked in a grueling impasse. Han Li only took a cursory glance at the situation, before paying no further attention to it. Most of the demon beasts and cultivators there were only at the foundation establishment and core formation stages, so he naturally couldn't be bothered to pay them any heed. He immediately transformed into a streak of silver light which also enveloped the humanoid puppet within, as he rushed out of the hall. After all, it was most likely the case the teleportation formation that could take him out of the Spirit Void Hall was located in the main hall. At Han Li's speed, he could travel several hundred feet in the time one took to take a breath, so he made it to the hall's entrance in the blink of an eye. However, right at this moment, a ghastly cry erupted from beside him as an unidentifiable monster with pitch-black scales all over its body suddenly appeared. Black chi was erupting from its mouth, and it was throwing itself straight at Han Li in a ferocious manner. Han Li couldn't help but heave a faint sigh upon seeing this. This demon beast's cultivation base wasn't bad, but it was clearly lacking in intelligence. All of the other beasts could sense that Han Li was extremely powerful and were scrambling to avoid him. Who would have thought that there would be an idiot like this offering itself up to Han Li? However, Han Li couldn't be bothered to pay much attention to such a weak demon beast. He merely flicked his fingers at the ladder and 5 bursts of piercing azure light shot forth. The demon beast let loose an agonized howl as its protective demonic chi proved to be completely ineffective in the face of Han Li's attacks. 5 large holes were blasted into the layer of demonic chi before its dead body fell straight to the ground. The other demon beasts knew that Han Li was not to be messed with, but they were still petrified by the sight of him killing one of their brethren with such ease. All of them were trembling with fear as they hurtled back in retreat to assess the situation from afar. In contrast, the North Night Palace disciples were completely reinvigorated by the sight of such a powerful ally. However, Han Li immediately rushed out of the hall without any intention of remaining at the scene. The cultivators and demon beasts in the hall all looked at one another, and a brief awkward silence ensued. The battle erupted again. On this occasion, the battle was even fiercer than it had been before. After exiting the hall, Han Li flew toward the location in his mind that he had secured from Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, using his soul search technique. He passed through several places on the way where demon beasts were engaged in heated battles with cultivators. It seemed that the entire Spirit Void Hall had been infiltrated by the hordes of demon beasts. Along the way, there were naturally a few foolish beasts who dared to attack him. All of them were either stabbed to death by his swords or killed by the puppet's arrows. Most of the assailants slain were 6th and 7th grade demon beasts. After all, just the spiritual pressure emanating from Han Li's body alone made low-tier demon beasts too scared to approach him. Furthermore, early metamorphosis stage demon beasts could immediately tell that Han Li was more powerful than them, so they naturally didn't want to engage such a powerful enemy in battle. However, as Han Li passing through a long corridor, he was stopped in his tracks by 2 early metamorphosis stage demon beasts. One of them wore blue robes with long ears and green eyes, while the other had a head of white hair with red skin and 3 demonic eyes. Both of them were exuding powerful killing intent as they glowered viciously at Han Li. Han Li looked at the 2 bodies of North Night Palace cultivators nearby, and his brows furrowed slightly. The spiritual energy fluctuations here were extremely chaotic, clearly indicating that an intense battle had just taken place. It was also quite apparent that these 2 demon beasts had emerged victorious. "Step aside. I'm not a North Night Palace cultivator and I have no intention of meddling in your battle," Han Li said in a cold voice. The green-eyed demon was extremely muscular, with 2 massive silver axes in his hands. It began to chuckle in a maniacal manner upon hearing Han Li's words. "Step aside. Do you think we're retarded? All human cultivators deserve to die. I just had a nascent soul and it tasted pretty good, and I just so happened to be looking for another one to eat. Your cultivation base appears to be superior to those 2, so your nascent soul must taste very good." The 3-eyed demon beast also had a sinister look on its face. Among the 2 demon beasts, one of them was only at the 8th grade, while the other one had just ascended to the 9th grade. As such, it was no wonder that they were confident in their abilities to hunt Han Li down. After all, the humanoid puppet was still in hiding, and even a normal 8th grade demon beast could match a mere mid-nascent soul cultivator in power. Han Li's brows furrowed at the sight of the two metamorphosis stage demon beasts, who were appraising him as if he were easy prey. It wouldn't be difficult for him to kill these two demon beasts, but he simply didn't want to waste magic power to kill them when he didn't stand to gain anything by doing so. Thus, he immediately made a hand seal, and claps of thunder erupted behind him as a pair of silvery white wings appeared on his back. Silver light flashed and he abruptly disappeared. He was planning to rush past the two demon beasts in order to avoid a battle. The two demon beasts faltered slightly upon seeing that, but the three-eyed 9th grade monster reacted extremely quickly as it hurriedly yelled, "Where do you think you're going?" Its head suddenly blurred before turning 180 degrees, thereby allowing it to face directly behind itself. At the same time, piercing black light suddenly radiated from the third demonic eye on its glabella, and a streak of black light shot forth through the air. The black light suddenly exploded over 200 feet behind the two demon beasts. Amid a flurry of black light, Han Li was forced to relinquish his attempt to flee as he stumbled out of thin air with a shocked expression on his face. The other green-eyed demon beast burst into raucous laughter upon seeing this as it said, "Ha ha, don't blame us, kid. Blame your luck for running into Brother Wu. Fellow Taoist Wu's heaven-piercing eye can dispel all types of teleportation and evasion techniques. Even your nascent soul won't be able to escape from us." And Li steadied himself before turning to the two demon beasts with a cold expression as he said, "Oh really? It seems that I should better educate myself. To think that I didn't know of the existence of such an amazing demon beast material. So be it. I didn't want to engage in a battle where I would stand to gain nothing even if I won, but it looks like this won't just be a waste of my time and energy. I'll send you two on your way now." Even though he had summoned a small silver shield to keep the shockwaves of the explosion at bay in the nick of time, he was still rather disheveled in the aftermath of that attack. After having his attempt to flee thwarted, Han Li finally made up his mind to kill these two pesky beasts. Just as his voice fell, a silver light flashed behind the green-eyed demon beast. An azure figure emerged before plunging its arm directly toward the demon beast's back. Right at this moment, the three-eyed demon beast's third demonic eye flashed, and it seemed to have sensed something. It immediately let loose a loud roar as it raised an arm into the air. A yellow ring then shot forth from his arm, hurtling directly toward that azure figure. And Li harumphed coldly as 36 small golden swords rushed out of his sleeve amid a ringing sound. The swords transformed into streaks of golden light that were around a foot long each as they swept toward the three-eyed demon beast. He waved his other hand to hurl the yellow monk staff through the air, which swelled to several tens of feet in length in the blink of an eye while hurtling forth amid a peculiar howling sound. At the same time as the flying swords and monk staff were unleashed, Han Li also opened his mouth to blast a fist-sized ball of purple flames through the air. Meanwhile, the Gradian fire raven on his shoulder spread its wings and transformed into a ball of crimson flames that flew forth like a shooting star. However, the purple and crimson balls of fire were flying at a leisurely rate, far slower and less intimidating than the flying swords and monk staff up ahead. All of Han Li's attacks were being directed toward the three-eyed demon beast, an observation that sent a jolt of shock running through the latter's heart. This demon beast originated from the myriad demon valley and had engaged in countless battles with the other demon beasts in the valley. As such, both its battle sense and battle experience were far superior to human cultivators of the same stage. Even though it had never taken on Han Li's attacks before, it could tell just from the astonishing spiritual light radiating from the flying swords and monk staff that those were extremely fearsome projectiles. As such, it was forced to turn its attention away from its 8th grade demon beast companion in order to focus on defending itself. It slapped the storage pouch on its waist, upon which a burst of yellow light that was over 100 feet in length emerged, flashing straight toward the golden flying swords. Explosive booms erupted as the two clashed amid blinding flashes of light. The treasure unleashed by the demon beast was able to keep all of the golden flying swords at bay on its own, and did not fall to a disadvantage. This was quite a surprising sight to Han Li. However, right in this instant, the massive monk staff flashed past the golden swords, arriving directly above the three-eyed demon beast's head before crashing down like a small mountain. The demon beast looked up with a dark expression and let loose a ferocious roar. All of its clothes were torn to shreds as a result, revealing a dark green body that appeared as if it had been forged from steel essence. It raised its arms, and they transformed into a set of massive steel pincers over 10 feet in length. It was going to use its arms to clamp down on the monk's staff. An earth-shattering boom erupted as black and yellow light intertwined with one another. The demon beast really was able to clamp down on the monk's staff firmly through brute strength alone, not allowing it to descend any further. However, this treasure was one of the 3 signature treasures used by the 3 masters of Kunwu. Han Li's cultivation arts prevented him from being able to unleash its full power, but the demon beast's massive body still shuddered, as it was forced into a hunch position by the devastating power of the attack. The demon beast was quite stunned to see this. Its true form was the descendant of a primordial beast that was not very commonly known. Not only did it naturally possess the 3rd demonic eye on its head, it possessed enormous strength that could allow it to tear tigers and lions apart with its bare hands as soon as it was born. As its cultivation base improved, this enormous strength was also enhanced. In its current state, it could easily carry several tons of weight without any trouble at all. However, the strike from the monk's staff had made both of its arms completely numb. How could it not be stunned by such devastating power? Right at this moment, an anguished howl erupted from nearby. The demon beast's heart sank as it hurriedly turned toward that direction to discover that the green-eyed demon beast's huge head had already been decapitated. Beside its headless corpse, there was a translucent black dagger whizzing through the air, radiating a faint black light. However, that humanoid azure figure from earlier was nowhere to be seen. Following the 3-eyed demon beast's cautionary roar and the protection it had received from the silver ring, the 8th-tier demon beast was able to evade the humanoid puppet's attack. However, just as it turned with shock and fury and was about to launch a counterattack, the devil essence dagger that had snuck around behind it had caught it completely off guard, thereby successfully slicing off its head. The demon beast had many abilities left unused, but in the face of such a powerful foe, there was no way for it to survive for any lengthy period of time. A flash of light erupted from beneath the demon beast's headless corpse and a ball of green light shot forth, attempting to flee into the ground. However, a silver light flashed as the humanoid azure figure somehow emerged from thin air below it, preventing it from being able to escape. The demon beast's essence stirred with shock and attempted to flee in another direction, but it was already too late. The green figure reached out with its hand and grabbed onto the ball of green light. It then immediately rubbed its hand together, and a silver light flashed as the demon beast's essence was reduced into a puff of smoke. Everything had taken place far too quickly. It seemed to the 3-eyed demon beast that its companion had been slain in the blink of an eye. Right at this moment, the azure humanoid figure turned to look at the 3-eyed demon beast. Silver light flashed around its body as it disappeared along with the devil essence dagger beside it. The demon beast's expression changed drastically as a hint of horror finally surfaced in its eyes. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A. Letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. It could sense just how terrifying that humanoid puppet and that black flying dagger was. It didn't know that the humanoid figure was a puppet, but what it did know was that it was no match for it and Han Li combined. A sense of remorse welled up in his heart as he planned to make a retreat. At the same time, light was flashing incessantly within its 3rd demonic eye as it tried to track down the humanoid puppet. Right at this moment, the balls of purple apex flames and gradient true flames flew toward it, one from the right and one from the left. The demon beast's hands were completely full, and it merely glanced at the 2 fireballs. It found the fireballs to be a little peculiar but didn't pay them much heed. It casually opened its mouth to unleash 2 bursts of yellow demonic chi, thinking that that would be sufficient to keep the fireballs at bay. However, it had made a severe lapse in judgment. Just as an elated look appeared on its face as it caught sight of the humanoid puppet with its 3rd demonic eye, the 2 fireballs exploded in unison. Boom! The purple flames transformed into a pillar of fire over 100 feet tall in the blink of an eye, sweeping aside the burst of demonic chi with disdain as it hurtled toward the demon beast. Before it had even gotten close to the demon beast, the glacial chi emanating from the pillar of flames was already making the space around it crackle and shriek. Layers of remarkably translucent ice quickly appeared from thin air before rapidly extending toward the demon beast, as if it were going to seal this entire space in ice. Meanwhile, that crimson fireball also exploded, but reverted back into its fire-raven form. However, with the crimson flames around it, its body had swelled to over a foot in size. It merely opened its mouth and swallowed the demonic chi shooting toward it before spreading open its wings and disappearing into the pillar of purple flames beside it. The demon beast's face immediately paled with fright at the sight of the glacial chi emanating from the purple apex flames. In its horror, it immediately opened its mouth to unleash countless streaks of yellow light, of which there seemed to be an infinite number. After tumbling through the air, those streaks of light transformed into peculiar insects that were about the size of thumbs. They had the upper bodies of centipedes and the lower bodies of scorpions. All of them were entirely yellow in color and appeared extremely sinister. As soon as the swarm of insects appeared, they began to exhale putrid mist, which converged to form a yellow ball in the blink of an eye. The ball of mist traveled directly toward the pillar of flames in an attempt to keep it at bay. Meanwhile, demonic light flashed over the demon beast's body as its arms expanded even further. It was trying to inject more power into its arms in order to forcibly free itself from under the monk's staff before fleeing the battle. The three-eyed demon beast was completely devoid of any battle intent. All it wanted to do was to run for its life. As soon as the yellow mist came into contact with the purple flames, the mist immediately began to waver and quiver. Parts of the mist were turning into crystals before falling from the sky. However, the countless insects behind the ball of mist were still exhaling yellow mist incessantly, thereby managing to temporarily keep the pillar of flames at bay. At this moment, a sharp cry erupted from within the purple pillar of flames. The entire pillar abruptly converged and transformed into a massive raven over 100 feet in size, with purple fiery wings and a pair of crimson eyes. The raven only had to flap its wings slightly to unleash a pillar of purple flames that was several times more powerful than the previous one. Not only did the flames sweep aside the yellow mist with ease, even the strange insects behind the cloud were sealed in ice, completely immobilized. The fire raven's crimson eyes flashed, and it flew toward the three-eyed demon beast with boundless glacial chi emanating from its body. The demon beast was trapped under the immense power of the monk's staff and couldn't move a single inch. As such, it could only blast out a streak of black light from its third demonic eye. However, the black light immediately disappeared into the fire raven's body, inflicting no damage on its target whatsoever. The purple fire raven let loose a long cry and reached the three-eyed demon beast in a flash. The demon beast's entire body was enveloped by turbulent purple flames, and it let loose a howl of anguish before it was sealed into a massive purple ice statue, frozen solid with an expression of shock and horror on its face. Its protective demonic chi was completely ineffective against the purple apex flames. A humanoid figure flashed toward the ice statue, and the humanoid puppet emerged amid a burst of silver light. It rubbed its hands together before raising them into the air in unison, upon which two arcs of golden lightning struck the statue amid the sound of a resounding thunderclap. As a result, the purple ice crumbled, and the physical body of the demon beast sealed within naturally fell apart as well. However, a burst of green light then flashed through the air as a ball of green flames even larger than the green-eyed demon beast's essence shot forth. It only flashed a few times before it traveled over 200 feet away. "Isn't it a little too late to try and run now?" A cold voice sounded, followed by an explosive thunderclap. A silver arc of light abruptly appeared before the green flames, and Han Li emerged from within with his hands clasped behind his back. Silver light shimmered around his body as he appraised the demon beast's essence with a half-smile. The demon beast's essence immediately tried to flee in another direction, but Han Li merely extended a hand to produce a green wooden ruler, which he gently waved toward the beast's essence. Spiritual light flashed as a huge silver lotus that was around a foot in diameter instantly appeared beneath the beast's essence. The petals turned slightly, and the demon beast was struck by the feeling that all of the spiritual chi around it had congealed, making it unable to unleash its teleportation technique. Its heart sank as spiritual light erupted from the silver petals and streaks of seven-colored Buddhist light shot forth from the center of the lotus. The streaks of light ensnared the beast's essence before rapidly pulling it back and forcibly capturing it into the silver lotus. A cry of shock and horror rang out, and the silver lotus flashed several times before crumbling into non-existence. The demon's essence within it also disappeared like the wind, completely vanishing from this world. Han Li heaved a faint sigh as the wooden ruler in his hand also disappeared at his behest. At this moment, the humanoid puppet flew toward Han Li and expressionlessly handed him something. The items being offered to Han Li consisted of two storage pouches, one silver ring ancient treasure, and an inky black bead that was about the size of a thumb. Among them, that bead was none other than the three-eyed demon beast's third demonic eye. Han Li narrowed his eyes and began to carefully examine this demon beast material. Aside from the fact that it was entirely pitch black in color, Han Li didn't discover anything out of the ordinary about it. However, when he looked into the demonic eyes, his expression suddenly changed before he stowed it away along with the silver ring. The silver ring was a great ancient treasure, but in the eyes of the current Han Li, it was only barely worth keeping. As for that massive yellow streak of light that had held Han Li's flying swords at bay earlier, following the death of its wielder, it had become an ancient blade that was neither a saber nor a sword. After a brief examination, Han Li also stowed it away into his storage pouch. After putting away the flying swords and monk staff, Han Li didn't remain here any longer. He obscured the humanoid puppet again before rushing toward the end of the corridor as a streak of azure light. As he got closer and closer to the main hall, the number of North Night Palace cultivators and demon beasts he encountered declined sharply. However, those who did appear were all extremely powerful cultivators demon beasts, including some nascent soul cultivators and metamorphosis stage demon beasts. However, due to the fact that none of them got in his way, Han Li only took glances at them from afar and naturally didn't cause trouble for himself by interfering with those battles. After passing by several courtyards and a plaza, Han Li finally saw where the main hall of the Spirit Void Hall was situated. The white jade walls around the main hall stretched as far as the eyes could see, but the gate's position before him wasn't all that tall or wide. It was only just over 100 feet tall, and it seemed that it was merely one of the side gates. At the entrance of the gate, there were people and one demon beast engaged in a heated battle. The two white-robed cultivators consisted of one male and one female, of which the male cultivator was the North Night Palace's overseer elder, the gray-haired Elder Yi, while the female cultivator was a beautiful woman in white palatial robes. It was none other than Bai Ye. The two of them were battling a black-robed old man who looked completely like a human. Hai's head of long hair was flashing with azure light, and a cold gleam was shimmering in his eyes, striking the onlooker with a sense of intimidation. Bai Ye and Elder Yi were wielding two silver flying swords and a peculiar jade vial that blasted black-white chi, and they appeared to be struggling against the might of that old man. In one hand, the old man was wielding a shimmering azure net. When the net was spread open, it transformed into an azure cloud that was over 100 feet wide with lightning flashing within, creating a formidable sight to behold. In his other hand, he was wielding a pitch-black treasure that appeared to be a metal pestle. With every swing of the treasure, several tens of projections would be summoned to attack his opponents. Some of those projections were substantial, while others were merely illusions, and they were very difficult to deal with. This old man was able to force Bai Ye and Elder Yi firmly onto the back foot, while he himself appeared to be very relaxed. However, the jade vial that Elder Yi was wielding appeared to be an extremely powerful treasure. The black-white chi pouring forth from within was able to take on most of the bolts of azure lightning, as well as the projections summoned by the black pestle. Meanwhile, Bai Ye's silver flying swords were also quite powerful in their own right, and the two of them were managing to stave off defeat together. Blue light flashed through Han Li's eyes as his gaze scanned toward the old man, upon which his pupils contracted as his expression changed slightly. This old man was a 10th grade metamorphosis stage demon beast. Even with his bright-sight spirit eyes, he was unable to identify what kind of demon beast the old man's true form was. Han Li's heart jolted slightly as the streak of azure light that he had transformed into reached the edges of their battlefield in the blink of an eye. However, he showed no intention of stopping whatsoever as he abruptly accelerated. A flash of blinding azure light erupted as Han Li attempted to rush past the three of them en route to the main hall. "You're not getting away." As a 10th grade demon beast, the old man certainly wasn't going to let a human get away right under his nose. He could sense that Han Li was a mid-nascent soul cultivator, but he didn't pay that much heed. He raised his hand casually to point toward the azure net, upon which the azure cloud that the net had transformed into shuddered amid a loud rumbling sound. Several tens of balls of azure lightning shot forth from within, heading straight for Han Li. All of those fist-sized balls of lightning swelled to the size of human heads as they shot forth through the air, sealing off an area with a radius of over 200 feet and affording Han Li no avenue for escape. Han Li's brows furrowed upon seeing this, but he didn't stop to address the threats at hand. Instead, the humanoid puppet behind him suddenly revealed itself. It raised an arm into the air to summon a small bow that was enveloped in crimson flames, before gently drawing the bowstring with his other hand. A resounding boom erupted as countless balls of fire hurtled toward the azure balls of lightning. The balls of red and green clashed in midair before exploding into azure and crimson balls of fire, creating a marvelous spectacle to behold. The power of the fireballs was clearly inferior to that of the azure lightning, but they were still able to slow down the azure balls, buying Han Li enough time to flash past the three that were engaged in battle, allowing him to escape into the hall through the gate. Huh! A cry of surprise escaped from the old man's mouth. With this 10th grade demon beast's astonishing cultivation base, he was able to immediately catch sight of the humanoid puppet that had appeared behind Han Li, which was why he was so surprised. He looked on as Han Li rushed into the hall and his brows furrowed slightly, but he didn't give chase. Instead, he focused his attention back on the two opponents he was facing and began to inject more power into his attacks. Ye was also extremely shocked. The azure streak of light had flown past too quickly for her to identify that it was Han Li, but the azure light was extremely familiar to her. After a split second of contemplation, she realized that it was definitely Han Li who had just sped past them. Could it be that the Grand Elder and the others have already exited the profound Jade Cave? The thought had only just occurred to Ye when the old man began to increase the intensity of his attacks. As such, she was unable to contemplate the issue any further, and could only inject spiritual power into her flying swords in a frenzy. The two flying swords were like flood dragons emerging from the sea, assisting Elder Yi to just barely hold off the devastating attacks being thrown at them. Elder Yi was also very surprised that the streak of azure light had been able to withstand the old demon beast's lightning attack before rushing into the hall. He didn't recognize that streak of azure light, but he sensed no demonic chi coming from it, and that, coupled with the fact that the old demon beast had unleashed an attack against it, indicated that this was a friend rather than a foe. As such, he didn't think too much about this matter as he injected more power into his jade vial. He and Ye were only mid-nascent soul cultivators, so even with this dual chi vial, spirit treasure replica, it was still too tall in order to expect them to take down a 10th grade demon beast. At this moment, Han Li rushed through the gate and traveled for over 100 feet before revealing himself again. He quickly surveyed his surroundings, trying to assess the situation within the main hall before deciding on a course of action. However, before he had the chance to identify what was going on, the raucous laughter of an elderly man suddenly erupted. So there's another one that wants to die. Goo, one more or one less doesn't matter anyway. Get in here. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, and before he had a chance to react, black light flashed around him, and the surrounding scenery began to warp. In the blink of an eye, he had been transferred into a space where black demonic chi was tumbling in all directions. He had been trapped by some sort of treasure. Han Li was naturally shocked upon making this realization. The demonic chi around him surged before sweeping toward him, as if it were attempting to crush him to death. Han Li took a deep breath as his hands balled up into tight fists in his sleeves. Rumbling thunderclaps erupted from his body as a layer of golden lightning arcs emerged, instantly encapsulating his body within. Several tens of small golden swords then flew out of his sleeves, circling around Han Li before transforming into fragments of golden light. Those light fragments settled outside the arcs of lightning to provide a second layer of defense. At this moment, the black demonic chi had reached Han Li and crashed into the golden light from all directions. The golden light manifested from his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords danced like wagon wheels, keeping all of the surrounding demonic chi at bay. Seeing as the demonic didn't appear to be as difficult to deal with as he had imagined, Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief. However, his expression was still quite grave as he looked around incessantly. Unfortunately, there was nothing around him aside from murky darkness. Your flying swords aren't bad at all. I'll take them and play with them for a while. A surprised elderly voice sounded from somewhere within the darkness. It was quite clear that the being who had held Han Li captive in this treasure had developed an interest in his swords. Han Li faltered initially upon hearing this before a cold smile appeared on his face. He raised his hands, and a ball of three-colored lightly abruptly slid out of his sleeve. The spiritual light receded, and the triflame fan was revealed in his hand. His opponent was clearly quite powerful, so Han Li had no choice but to take this battle seriously. Right after the triflame fan appeared in his hand, The demonic chi overhead suddenly began to tremor violently amid a loud howling sound. Demonic chi tumbled like turbulent waves, creating a massive vortex in midair. The vortex was completely pitch black in color with a radius of over 100 feet. As soon as it emerged, it immediately began to rotate rapidly while emitting a sharp screeching noise. A vast expanse of black light then shot forth from the center of the vortex, sweeping directly toward Han Li. Han Li's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and he knew that he had been plunged into a perilous situation. As such, he immediately made a hand seal to activate his sword arts. A crisp ringing sound erupted from the golden light around him, and the golden swords suddenly converged, forming a golden lotus flower that was constantly swirling with light as it slowly began to rotate. Right at this moment, the black light came tumbling down and inundated the entire golden lotus flower. As soon as the two made contact with one another, the sound of countless swords and blades clashing erupted, creating a very disturbing chorus of chaotic sounds that disrupted one's cognitive functions. Han Li was abruptly struck by a sense of dizziness, and at the same time, an immense force began to draw the golden lotus formed by his flying swords upward, trying to wrest it away from Han Li's control. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he began to circulate all of the magic power within his body. If he were an average mid-nascent soul cultivator, he really wouldn't be able to prevent his magic treasure from being wrenched away by this enormous suction force. However, after cultivating the Azure Essence Sword art, his cultivation base was a lot more powerful than that of cultivators of the same stage. Furthermore, his Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm sword had been refined on several occasions, with rare materials added each time, thereby making it a treasure that normal magic treasures simply couldn't hold a candle to. As Han Li activated his magic power and sword art with all his might, the Golden Lotus was finally able to withstand this burst of suction force. Even so, it was tremoring violently as it rotated incessantly, keeping the black light erupting from the vortex at bay. At this moment, Han Li brandished his feather fan without any hesitation, before waving it toward the vortex up above with a grave expression. 3 pillars of fire erupted from the fan amid a spluttering sound, crashing directly into the black light descending from above. A quick succession of explosions rang out as the 3 colored flames struck the black light, creating an effect that was akin to cold water being poured into hot oil. It was clear that the 3 colored flames were far more powerful than the black light, and the pillars of fire were only stalled for a split second before easily vanquishing the black light. The flames then shot forth into the vortex up above, upon which they abruptly disappeared. Han Li's brows furrowed as he looked up at the vortex overhead with rapt focus. Moments later, a ringing sound began to emit from the center of the vortex, and the black light around it began to swell and contract. An earth-shattering boom erupted from its center. All of the demonic chi in a radius of several hundred feet surged toward it as if in a maddened frenzy, and the vortex disappeared amid a burst of brilliant black light. Han Li's expression was quite grim as he stowed away his triflame fan. Even though he had vanquished the black vortex, there was no hint of joy or triumph on his face. After all, that attack alone had expended close to 20% of his magic power, and it didn't appear to have hurt his opponent at all. "That's a spirit treasure replica, so it's you. Is your surname Han?" The elderly voice sounded again, this time tinged with a hint of surprise. "How do you know about me?" Han Li's expression stirred slightly. He felt like he already knew the answer to that question, but he still decided to ask it anyway. Your feather fan spirit treasure is far too easily recognizable. I heard you foiled one of my plans back on the Kunwu Mountain. What are you doing here in the North Night Palace now?" the elder voice asked. "Kunwu Mountain, your fellow Taoist chief from the Myriad Demon Valley." Han Li's heart jolted, and his expression changed upon making that realization. He didn't know much about the Myriad Demon Valley, but it was naturally impossible for him not to have heard about this valley master of the Myriad Demon Valley. Most people were oblivious to his true cultivation base, but even that Myriad Year Corpse Xiang was at the late nascent soul stage, so according to Han Li's estimation, this old demon was most likely one of the few deity transformation cultivators in the human world. Otherwise, the Myriad Demon Valley would have been wiped off the face of the Great Jin countless times already. "That's right. I heard from Master Xiang that you have some sort of connection with Fairy Ling Long, who is an acquaintance of mine, and that you went to the 9th level of the Devil Suppressing Pagoda with her. Now that the perfect Devil Chi on the 9th level has been sealed again, you've appeared here safe and sound. Fairy Ling Long must have returned to the spirit realm already. At the mention of the spirit realm, the elderly voice trembled slightly as if with excitement as well as a hint of fear. Ling Long has indeed returned to the spirit realm using the star-defying plate. You know her? Han Li asked with an uncertain expression on his face. At the same time, spiritual light flashed in his hand as he surreptitiously summoned the green wooden ruler. In his other hand, the fire cauldron that had been shrunk to only several inches in size also appeared. The elderly voice suddenly cooled as it said, I was just a nobody in the spirit realm who saw her occasionally from afar. Fairy Ling Long must have left something with you, right? I presume that you also have the 8 spirit ruler spirit treasure, right? Don't try to tell me the ruler was taken to the spirit realm by Fairy Ling Long. Unless it's been refined by the artifact imprint technique, there's no way it could be taken to another realm through the boundary between realms. Han Li's eyelids twitched, but he didn't say anything. However, he unconsciously tightened his grip around the green wooden ruler in his sleeve. So what is it? Is my question difficult to answer, or are you simply unwilling to answer? The elderly voice became even more forbidding. At the same time, a burst of powerful spiritual qi erupted from the surrounding demonic qi, pressing down upon Han Li with immense force. This fearsome cultivation base was something that could only belong to a true 10th grade demon beast, but Han Li's spiritual sense wasn't inferior to that of a late nascent soul cultivator. As such, his body only swayed slightly before he was able to right himself and withstand the pressure crashing down from above. The elderly voice was slightly surprised this time. Upon sensing this burst of vast spiritual pressure, Han Li narrowed his eye as a streak of light erupted from his pupils. Han Li exhaled as a peculiar look appeared on his face, and he said, I heard that you've been in seclusion for countless years in the Myriad Demon Valley and wouldn't leave unless if it were to take care of matters of the utmost importance. As such, the being here is not your actual body, am I correct? After all, how could the mighty old devil Qi possess only so little spiritual power? So what? The elderly voice was completely cold and expressionless. I have no interest in your conflict with the North Night Palace, and I have no intention of interfering with this matter. I only want to leave this place using the teleportation formation here. If you don't want me to join forces with the North Night Palace cultivators, then I suggest you let me go. Han Li had also discarded all pretense of politeness as he threatened in a cold voice. As long as there weren't any deity transformation cultivators around, he had nothing to fear. Old Devil Qi burst into raucous laughter before threatening in a sinister voice. Ha! I haven't been threatened like this for many, many years. I heard from Master Xiang that our Divine Devilbane Lightning is quite powerful, but Divine Devilbane Lightning is only effective against demonic Qi. Do you really think you're a match for me now that you're trapped in my Myriad Demon Flag? If you don't want your body and soul to be destroyed, hand over the 8 Spirit Ruler and everything else that Fairy Ling Long left to you. If I'm in a good mood, I might consider letting you live. Han Li heaved an internal sigh. It appeared that this old devil Qi didn't see him as a threat at all and wouldn't let him leave without a fight. The Myriad Demon Flag was something that he had heard about on many occasions. It was an extremely renowned replica that was closest to a true divine spirit treasure. As such, it was no wonder that this old devil would be so confident in his ability to crush Han Li. Seeing as negotiations were clearly going to get him nowhere, Han Li didn't waste any more time with words. He immediately raised his hand. A ball of red light shot forth. It spun in the air before hovering several tens of feet above his head, where it remained, completely stationary. That ball of red light was none other than the nameless fire cauldron. Han Li made a hand seal and began to chant something. Brilliant light erupted from the cauldron as it swelled drastically in size, reaching several tens of feet in diameter in the blink of an eye. At Han Li's behest, the lid of the cauldron came flying off. A ringing sound erupted from within the cauldron, following which fist-sized fire ravens rushed into the air. There were over 1,000 fire ravens summoned at once, and they surrounded Han Li to create a vast expanse of red light. Han Li didn't dare to underestimate the Myriad Demon Flag's power, so he unleashed all of the fire cauldron's power at once. Not only that, but the Gradian fire raven on his shoulder had also disappeared as it mingled with its brethren. Its appearance was completely identical to all of the other fire ravens, so no one else would be able to tell the difference. Right at this moment, Han Li's chanting came to a halt. He let loose a low cry, and all of the fire ravens began to blast crimson flame out of their beaks. In the blink of an eye, waves of fire that were several tens of feet tall swept up around Han Li before crashing toward the nearby demonic Qi. The entire space was transformed into a crimson sea of flames, elevating the surrounding temperature drastically. As the demonic chi made contact with the sea of fire, they immediately began a clash amid explosive booms akin to thunderclaps. Slowly but surely, the sea of fire was able to force back the surrounding demonic chi. You think you can escape from my myriad demon flag with such a pitiful trick? Stop daydreaming. Old Devil Chi chuckled coldly before unleashing a long howl that was surely audible even high up in the heavens. Upon hearing this sharp howl, all of the demonic chi that had been forced back into retreat immediately gathered together, converging to form balls of black chi. A series of pitch-black demon beasts and monsters appeared within the demonic chi. They were all snarling viciously and came in all shapes and sizes. The largest ones were over 300 feet in size, while the smallest ones were only several feet in size. However, all of them wore the same ferocious expression as they appraised Han Li, who was situated in the middle of the sea of fire. Han Li's heart jolted upon seeing this. He cast his gaze out into the distance to find that there were seemingly countless demonic beasts gathered amid the turbulent demonic chi, stretching as far as the eyes could see. A sharp howl erupted as these demon beast puppets came pouncing at him from all directions. Han Li's eyelids twitched as he silently raised a hand, casting several azure celestial technique up toward the fire cauldron hovering above his head. The cauldron tremored before radiating scintillating red light, as the entire cauldron was enshrouded in crimson flames, transforming it into a massive fireball. Countless bursts of scorching flames flew through the air from the cauldron, joining the sea of fire. The air temperature within the entire space was abruptly raised once again as the sea of fire surged forth with even greater ferocity. At the same time, fireballs that were roughly the size of human heads flew out from within the sea of fire. There was a large fire raven encapsulated in each and every ball of fire, and they borrowed on the power of the sea of flames to charge toward the surrounding demon beast puppets. Crimson fireballs of different sizes began to explode within the extremely dense demon beast puppet army. Over 1,000 fire ravens danced violently through the air, clashing with the demon beasts around them. Flames and demonic chi surged as fiery light and black chi intertwined with one another. Countless clashes took place in the blink of an eye, and an impasse ensued. It was a rather peculiar situation, as the demon beasts were able to materialize their bodies over and over again after being vanquished by the fire ravens, while the fire ravens were able to be reborn from the sea of fire after being destroyed. It was as if there were no end to either of the two armies. A frosty harumph sounded from within the demonic chi. The sound of chanting then rang out from all directions, and it was none other than Old Devil Chi's voice. Han Li's eyes flashed and he suddenly looked upward, upon which his expression abruptly changed. At the spot in the air where the vortex had originally been situated, demonic chi began to tumble violently as a massive paw slowly extended from within the demonic chi. The paw was pitch black and reflected an oily sheen. It was around 300 to 400 feet in size, and attached to it were 5 sharp claws, all of which were several tens of feet in length. They were shimmering with a cold, sinister light, presenting a very intimidating spectacle to behold. Even though the massive paw was yet to descend, Han Li was still struck by a powerful sense of pressure and oppression, as if there were nowhere for him to run. The chanting came to a halt, and the massive paw came crashing downward. A gust of demonic wind was swept up, howling through the air like a hurricane, and causing the sea of fire around Han Li to waver and flicker erratically. Even the massive monk staff was disproportionately tiny in the face of this black demonic paw. An earth-shattering boom erupted as the massive staff clashed with the demonic paw. It was as if the monk staff had struck a gargantuan fortress constructed from steel essence, and it was only able to slow down the demonic paw for a split second before it was sent flying. The colossal demonic paw then came crashing down toward Han Li. Han Li pursed his lips, and the 36 golden flying swords around him emitted a ringing sound in unison, before converging above his head at his behest. Brilliant golden light erupted as the flying swords instantly combined to form a massive golden sword that was 50 to 60 feet in length. The sound of thunderclaps then rang out once again as a series of thick golden lightning arcs erupted from the surface of the massive sword. The lightning arcs converged to form a dazzling streak of golden light, which hurtled directly toward the descending paw. The huge sword had been materialized from 36 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, and with the violent injection of magic power from Han Li, It was able to destroy virtually anything and everything. Golden light flashed, and the gargantuan paw was forcibly sliced in half. A muffled groan sounded from within demonic chi, seemingly indicating that old devil chi had sustained some type of injury from that clash. The two halves of the demonic paw dissipated in the wind and disappeared as balls of demonic chi. Upon hearing the muffled groan, blue light abruptly flashed through Han Li's eyes as he stabbed a finger toward the golden streak of light in the sky. The golden light immediately circled around at his behest, transforming into a golden serpent as it bit down on a certain spot in the air. A loud thump erupted as a ball of piercing black light erupted at that location without any premonition. An inky black shield then appeared, which the golden serpent was unable to bite through. Right at this moment, black light flashed from behind the shield as a short figure appeared. This figure was a small child with 3 small braids on his head pointing up at the sky, and an unidentifiable silver lock hanging in front of his chest. This was the form that old Devil Chi had taken outside the City of Ice. The small child was currently standing behind the black shielding, looking on with a hint of surprise as the golden serpent continued to tear viciously at the shield. Auric essence. To think that you added such a rare material into your flying swords. No wonder you were able to break through my heavenly demon paw. The small child reverted back to his normal calm expression as he turned to appraise Han Li. Han Li completely ignored what the small child was saying and murmured to himself, "Looks like I was right as well. This really isn't your actual body." The small child was furious at Han Li's display of arrogance, and he was so enraged that he burst into laughter. He then abruptly feigned a grabbing motion, and black light flashed in his hand, upon which a murky gray flag appeared in his grasp. He, I only displayed 20% of the myriad demon flag's power just then, yet you're arrogant enough to think that you've got the better of me. I'm going to destroy your body and soul with this next attack, and show you the true might of the myriad demon flag. At the conclusion of his sentence, old Devil Chi unfurled the small flag in his hand, seemingly preparing to unleash some type of powerful attack. A focused expression appeared on Han Li's face as he suddenly pointed a finger at the sea of fire. All of a sudden, several tens of fire ravens shot forth from within the sea of fire, flying directly toward the small child. The huge golden sword also emitted a long cry as he activated his sword's arts, and it tremored before splitting back up into 36 golden flying swords. Each and every one of the swords was around a foot in length, and they were all emanating dazzling golden light. The swords then replicated in the hundreds amid a ringing sound, before circling through the air and flying toward the small child in a wild frenzy. The child pursed his lips and set aside his flag for now, as he pointed a finger toward the small black shield in front of him. The shield trembled slightly before transforming into a misty barrier of light that encapsulated the small child within. Golden and black spiritual light began to flicker wildly as countless swords came crashing into the light barrier. However, the sustained assault was only able to send ripples of black light flashing across the barrier, but was unable to even harm it in the slightest. This unremarkable-looking black light barrier was like an indestructible fortress. As for the several tens of fire ravens flying through the air, the small child completely ignored them and began to activate the small flag in his hand again. Those fire ravens were manifested from fire essence, but they still weren't enough to pose a threat to the small child. In his eyes, his shield would be able to keep these fire ravens at bay. Thus, the small gray flag was waved through the air, upon which the entire space tremored violently. Bursts of murky gray mist suddenly emerged from the demonic chi around Han Li's sea of fire. This mist-like substance then began to exude a peculiar spatial fluctuation. 4 black holes abruptly appeared in midair, each of which was around 10 feet in diameter, and it appeared as if something were going to emerge from within. However, Han Li completely ignored those black holes as a loud thunderclap erupted from behind him. Just as the fire ravens were about to reach the black light barrier, silvery white wings surfaced on his back, and his entire body disappeared amid a flash of silver light. Almost at the exact same moment, the crimson flames gushing out from the beaks of the fire ravens struck the black light barrier, where they exploded into scorching balls of fire. All of the golden swords were also crashing into the black light barrier over and over again, but it was just as the small child had anticipated. The black light barrier was able to withstand all of these attacks with ease. The small child looked on as Han Li disappeared from within the sea of fire, and his expression changed slightly, but a cold smile then appeared on his face as his chanting faltered momentarily. He flipped over his other little hand, and a length of black rope appeared. He whipped the rope through the air, and it shot forth like a snake before manifesting 7 or 8 more ropes, all of which wound themselves around a certain spot in the air that was around 50 to 60 feet away from the small child. In the next instant, a silver arc of light flashed as Han Li's body emerged amid a clap of thunder, right at the spot that the black ropes were binding around. Before he even had a chance to react, a peculiar light flashed from the ropes as they abruptly contracted to completely immobilize him. A sinister smile appeared on the small child's face as he opened his mouth, within which a black light was flashing. He seemed to be waiting for Han Li to be bound by the ropes before blasting some sort of treasure out of his mouth to attack him. This development was something that Han Li didn't anticipate. Never would he have thought that his opponent would have such a mysterious treasure that would be able to predict the exact location he would appear at after using his lightning movement technique. Thus, his expression changed drastically as he let loose a low roar before making a hand seal. Brilliant green light erupted from his body, clashing with the black ropes. Immediately thereafter, Han Li's body disappeared again, leaving only an azure talisman bound within the ropes. Han Li's body then surfaced over 100 feet away, and his face was a little pale, seemingly from overexertion. In that perilous situation, Han Li had expended a vast amount of magic power to use the spirit form talisman that he was still yet to refine, thereby using it as a body double to help him dodge that bullet. The azure talisman wavered within the ensnarement of the ropes before dissipating into specks of azure light. Those specks of light shot forth toward Han Li and disappeared into his body in the blink of an eye. The small child's expression became a little strained upon seeing that. The black light in his mouth flashed a couple of times, but he still harumphed coldly before slowly closing his mouth in the end. Right at this moment, several tens of feet away from the black light barrier in a certain direction, silver light flashed and an azure humanoid figure emerged. It was none other than the humanoid puppet, and it had managed to approach the small child without him noticing. It raised its hands and the red bow appeared. Dazzling red light erupted, following which countless fiery arrows shot forth from an extremely close range. At the same time, an inky black dagger appeared above the small child's head. It was intermingled within the countless streaks of crimson flames and came stabbing downward viciously and silently. Even though this was old Devil Chi's true body, from a spiritual sense perspective alone, this demon was far superior to the old man that had been transformed from the azurback wolf. In the face of this abrupt turn of events, the small child was startled, but he immediately identified the black dagger above his head as the lethal threat. As such, his hand flew up at an incredible speed before slamming into the shield in front of him. He then raised his head and opened his mouth again, upon which a coin-like treasure was sent flying upward amid a burst of black chi. The countless flaming arrows overhead converged to form a thick pillar of flames, which struck the black light barrier. At the same time, the small child's hand made contact with the shield before him, and the thickness of the light barrier instantly increased by severalfold. Following a resounding boom, an astonishing explosion of flames erupted on the barrier, causing it to tremor in an alarming manner. The devil essence dagger up above also struck the tip of the light barrier soundlessly. The dagger was able to slice a thin slit in the light barrier, through which it continued downward toward the small child. However, right at this moment, the coin-like treasure that was enveloped in black chi arrived just in the nick of time, clashing with the dagger to create a crisp ringing sound. A peculiar light flashed once again, and both treasures disappeared at the same time. Han Li's heart jolted with surprise upon seeing this. Thankfully, the humanoid puppet informed him through a spiritual sense message that the devil essence dagger hadn't actually disappeared. Instead, it had simply been trapped someplace nearby. Han Li focused his attention back on the battle at hand and unleashed his other trump card. Among the several tens of fire ravens who had been kept at bay outside the black light barrier, one of them suddenly spread their wings and let loose a loud cry. Its body swelled to several times its original size in the blink of an eye before a burst of white glacial chi was blasted out of its mouth. This was none other than the Gradian fire raven that had absorbed a large amount of profound Jade's glacial chi in the profound Jade cave. Without careful refinement over a period of months or even years, there was naturally no way that this glacial chi could be converted into the essential fire of the Gradian true flame. However, a lot of it had just been released at Han Li's behest. The white glacial chi struck the light barrier, creating a stark contrast between the black light and the white chi. A thick layer of translucent ice began to spread over the light barrier, It took only a split second before a massive ball of ice was formed, sealing the black light barrier and the small child within. A hint of elation appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing. However, he was naturally aware of the fact that just an ice seal wouldn't actually be able to restrict a 10th-grade demon beast. As such, he was only using this attack to try and temporarily immobilize him. At the same time, he immediately made a hand seal while pointing toward the golden swords hovering near the huge ball of ice. He began a chant as the golden swords flew into the sky in unison, circling around in the air before dispersing and beginning to vanish one by one. Old Devil Chi was proving to be a very troublesome opponent to deal with, so Han Li decided to set up the Aureate Sword formation in order to slay this demon. However, he only managed to set up half of the formation before the massive ball of ice began to shudder violently. Immediately thereafter, countless strands of silver thread pierced through the ice before slicing the ball of ice into slabs of different sizes. Through the semi-transparent layer of ice, Han Li could see that the black light barrier within had already disappeared. It had reverted back to the pitch-black shield, while the small child was holding a treasure in his hand that was emanating piercing silver light. The countless thin strands of silver threads were coming from none other than that ball of light. Within that ball of light was the silver lock that was hanging in front of the small boy's chest. Han Li heaved a faint internal sigh upon arriving at the realization that he wouldn't be able to finish setting up his sword formation. He immediately flipped his hand over with a grim expression to summon the green wooden ruler, before gently waving it at the small child from afar. Spiritual light flashed above the small child's head as a silver lotus with a diameter of roughly a foot appeared. The lotus spun in midair before sending a vast expanse of seven-colored Buddhist light raining down from above. The small child had just broken out of the ball of ice when the Buddhist light shone down upon him, momentarily stunning him. Right at this moment, the humanoid puppet rubbed its hands together, upon which brilliant flash of silver light erupted, and a spear that was several feet in length appeared in his hand. The small child's eyelids twitched upon seeing this, and the small gray flag in his hand flew up of its own accord before gently waving in the air. He was somehow able to ignore the Buddhist light's restrictive effect and activate the myriad demon flag in his hand. The space around the small child immediately began to twist and warp as a murky gray barrier appeared with him at its very center. Right at this moment, the humanoid puppet also raised an arm. The silver spear transformed into a streak of silver light as it screeched through the air. At such close quarters, the spear struck the barrier in front of the small child almost as soon as it left the puppet's hand. A peculiar scene then unfolded. The silver spear was easily able to puncture the barrier, but somehow missed the small child by over 10 feet before puncturing the barrier again and emerging on the other side. Han Li was rather taken aback upon seeing this. The humanoid puppet's spiritual sense had clearly already locked onto the small child, so how could it have missed by so much? However, he was soon struck with a sense of enlightenment. This barrier, manifested by the myriad demon flag, possessed the ability to warp space. This was not some ordinary barrier that could be dispelled in a minute or two. Behind the barrier, the small child held the myriad demon flag in one hand and the silver lock in the other as he glowered at Han Li with a cold expression. Black demonic light flashed incessantly over his body, slowly repelling the Buddhist light as he tried to struggle free of the restriction. Han Li's heart sank upon seeing this. It appeared that the opponent he was facing really was incomparable to a normal late-nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, battling such a powerful opponent within the myriad demon flag placed him at a further major disadvantage. With that in mind, he turned his attention to the 4 black holes that had appeared near the sea of fire. Even though the small child had been temporarily immobilized by him, the 4 black holes were still gradually expanding. Furthermore, the sound of indistinct beastly roars could be heard coming from within, as if there were some types of demon beasts that were about to emerge. Han Li's brows furrowed as he harumphed coldly, and he immediately decided on a course of action. He put away his 8-spirit ruler and made a hand seal. All of a sudden, the fire cauldron, fire raven, humanoid puppet, golden swords, and all of the other treasures tremored violently before hurtling back toward him. Only the Gradian fire raven remained, flying in circles around the spatial barrier as it unleashed one breath of glacial chi after another. Even though most of the glacial chi had been diverted elsewhere by the spatial barrier, the remaining glacial chi that actually struck their target was still able to seal the small child within ice again. However, the silver threads from the silver lock in his hand were able to immediately slice through the ice again, so the Fire Raven's efforts weren't bearing much fruit. At this moment, the Gradian Fire Raven also flew back toward Han Li. At the same time, a yellow talisman suddenly appeared in his hand. There was spiritual light shimmering from the runes on the talisman, and it was none other than the World-Breaker talisman that Fairy Ling Long had given to him prior to her departure. This talisman was extremely effective for breaking through restrictive spaces like this, but Han Li didn't want to waste such a valuable talisman, so he didn't use it from the get-go. However, he didn't know what other troublesome abilities the Myriad Demon Flag had, so he finally decided to bring out this talisman. What he intended to use this talisman for was not to break through that spatial barrier, but instead to escape from this space. After all, his opponent was still able to use the Myriad Demon Flag, so even if he could break that barrier, it would still be a difficult task for Han Li to kill him. As such, it was a wiser decision to escape from this restrictive space first. Thus, he pinched the talisman between two fingers and waved it toward the empty space right in front of him. Piercing yellow light erupted from the talisman as a burst of spatial fluctuations emerged. The space before him immediately began to twist and warp before revealing a transparent white ball of light. Han Li was ecstatic upon seeing this, and he immediately summoned all of his nearby treasures to him. The flying swords, fire ravens, and humanoid puppet all began to attack that spot in the air. A resounding boom immediately reverberated throughout the space, as an image of the spirit void hall in the outside world became visible through the white hole. In the distance, the small child was still struggling to break free from the restriction placed upon him, and an urgent look appeared on his face as he caught sight of what Han Li was doing. He immediately injected his power into the Myriad Demon Flag, as a pillar of gray light shot forth from the flag, crashing directly into the silver lotus in the air above. The two clashed amid a muffled thump, upon which both dissipated into nothingness. As soon as the small child freed himself, a burst of azure light erupted around Han Li's body. He had already transformed into a streak of azure light before disappearing into the white hole. All of the nearby treasures followed closely behind him. The small child held the small gray flag in his hand, with a thunderous look on his face. The azure light receded, and Han Li appeared in midair in the outside world. Right at this moment, the sound of thunderous explosions suddenly traveled into his ears. Han Li hurriedly summoned his flying swords to him to create a barrier of golden light before surveying his surroundings. What he saw made him draw a sharp breath. The main hall of the Spirit Void Hall was extremely vast, appearing to be over 10,000 feet in length and width. Several hundred feet away from him, there was a gargantuan object over 2,000 feet in length hanging in midair, and it was completely identical to the small gray flag he had seen in the demonic chi space. The only difference was that this flag was countless times more massive. Furthermore, demonic chi was tumbling incessantly over the surface of the colossal flag, and there were also flashing demonic runes of different sizes inscribed on the face of the flag. The entirety of the entrance that he had just passed through had been enshrouded under the Myriad Demon Flag. It was no wonder that Han Li had been drawn into the restriction, without any chance for evasion as soon as he had entered the hall. This was true Myriad Demon Flag, while the small flag wielded by Old Devil Chi was most likely just a manifestation of a wisp of the flag's spiritual nature. With shock surging through his heart, Han Li turned his attention to the very center of the main hall, where an extremely fierce battle seemed to be taking place. Most of the hall over there had been transformed into a glacial land. Howling white glacial chi was almost omnipresent in the air, and the tall pillars on the hall had all been covered in a thick layer of ice. There were also a series of ice mountains ranging from several tens to several hundreds of feet tall, lined up next to one another around the battlefield. In the air above the glacial land, there was a pristine white ice phoenix over 100 feet in size. Its entire body was covered in white glacial flames, and it was wreaking havoc to its heart's content. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. It was facing off against a beautiful middle-aged woman and two white-haired elderly men from the North Night Palace. All of them were wielding their treasures as they fought desperately to withstand the Ice Phoenix's attacks. The cultivators were all extremely powerful in their own right, but in the face of the Ice Phoenix's devastating power, they were still firmly on the back foot. Han Li's heart jolted with shock again as he looked at the layer of white glacial flames all over the Ice Phoenix's body. These glacial flames were extremely similar to Bai Mengxin's glacial phoenix flames, except they were countless times more powerful. Even after cultivating the glacial phoenix flames to their most powerful extent, there was no way that it could be this fearsome. Even though Han Li was a little suspicious about how this ice phoenix was related to the glacial phoenix flames, he didn't think too much about this matter. Instead, he felt that it was rather strange how old Devil Chi wasn't helping out the ice phoenix, but had chosen to suck himself into the myriad demon flag instead. That woman was clearly the palace master of the North Night Palace, the other late-nascent soul cultivator of the North Night Palace. It appeared that she was significantly weaker than Master Arctic Dragon. At the very least, she had never cultivated any glacial flames. Otherwise, with the assistance of two mid-nascent soul cultivators, they wouldn't be struggling so arduously against a 10th-grade ice phoenix. The ice phoenix's white glacial flames were simply far too powerful. After the three North Night Palace cultivators were swept up in the flames, their powers were immediately debilitated drastically. This was quite an eye-opening sight for Han Li. It was the first time that he had been made aware of the fact that glacial flames could be so powerful. The flames being unleashed by this ice phoenix were almost powerful enough to defy the natural order of heaven and earth. In such a perilous situation for the three North Night Palace cultivators, old Devil Chi could easily step in and crush the three of them with the phoenix by his side. Could it be that the ice phoenix and old Devil Chi didn't see eye to eye, so he didn't dare to emerge from the myriad demon flag? That was the only plausible explanation that Han Li could think of. However, right at this moment, a surprising incident took place. The demonic chi around the massive flag in the air began to tumble as a section of a dead body, and several damaged treasures fell from the flag, plummeting straight down into the hall. Han Li was caught by surprise and given a fright, but upon closer inspection, he discovered that the incomplete corpse was clothed in North Night Palace attire, and it appeared that they had been quite a high-ranking cultivator in the palace, most likely a nascent soul elder. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. Only then did he realize that he wasn't the only one to have been trapped in the myriad demon flag. There were other North Night Palace cultivators trapped in there as well. It was no wonder that the flag was hovering in midair, but was only guarding this entrance. Han Li was wondering how long those North Night Palace cultivators had been trapped in the flag. Those who had lasted until this point without being killed in the myriad demon flag had most likely unleashed some types of secret techniques that allowed them to temporarily contend with the might of the flag. Otherwise, with the might of old Devil Chi in conjunction with the power of the myriad demon flag, there was no way that those cultivators could have lasted this long. However, as long as there were still cultivators left unkilled in the flag, old Devil Chi most likely wouldn't be able to use the flag to pursue Han Li. With that in mind, Han Li was greatly relieved as he continued to carefully examine the rest of the hall. It didn't take long before he caught sight of a tall jade platform. The platform was over 1,000 feet in width and 60 to 70 feet tall. From a distance, Han Li could see that there were 3 teleportation formations lined up next to one another on the platform, one of which was large while the other 2 were relatively smaller. Han Li was ecstatic, and just as he was about to spring into action, a peculiar look suddenly appeared on his face. The humanoid puppet standing behind him abruptly feigned a grabbing motion toward a spot in the air. Over 100 feet away from Han Li, the space there warped and twisted before a black dagger shot forth from within. It was none other than the Devil Essence dagger that had gone missing in the demonic chi space. The dagger had somehow managed to break free of the restriction on its own and returned to Han Li. The puppet raised an arm, and the Devil Essence dagger disappeared in a flash into his sleeve. Han Li raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't exhibit much of a reaction to this. Spiritual light flashed around his body as he transformed into an azure streak of light, hurtling directly toward that platform with a horde of over 1,000 fire ravens, his flying swords, and other treasures. As long as he could escape from the Spirit Void Hall, he couldn't care less about whether the North Night Palace or the demon beasts emerged victorious. Moments later, the azure streak of light reached the center of the hall. However, Han Li didn't pass through that area ostentatiously. Instead, he circled around toward the platform in a long arc. However, due to the fact that most of the hall had been affected by the Ice Phoenix's glacial flames, Han Li had no choice but to activate a layer of purple apex flames over his body as he passed through. Thus, all of the white glacial chi was repelled by the purple flames and were unable to affect Han Li. Celestial ice flames. You're a North Night Palace cultivator as well. Don't think that you can fool me just because your ice flames have mutated. At the center of the hall, the Ice Phoenix had witnessed Han Li escape from the myriad demon flag while it was crushing the three North Night Palace cultivators. It was shocked that Han Li had been able to escape from the flag, so it had been paying some attention to Han Li this entire time. As Han Li began to fly through the air as a streak of azure light, it became extremely wary, but seeing as Han Li was skirting around them, seemingly traveling toward an alternate destination, it decided to ignore him. After all, the fact that Han Li was able to escape from the myriad demon flag indicated that he was definitely no ordinary cultivator. If he didn't want to interfere in their battle, then there was no need for it to take on such a powerful enemy for no good reason. However, as soon as the purple flames emerged from Han Li's body, the Ice Phoenix's eyes immediately turned crimson in color as it let loose a sharp cry. It seemed to have somehow been irked to the extreme by the purple apex flames, and it had abruptly turned on Han Li. Han Li faltered upon seeing the Ice Phoenix's newly developed animosity toward him, and before he had figured out what was happening, an extremely resentful cry erupted from the Ice Phoenix's beak as it violently flapped its wings toward him. The ice feathers on its wings instantly shot forth like countless arrows before transforming into translucent flying swords, each of which was around half a foot long. There were about 500 to 600 such swords, and they came flying toward Han Li like a torrential storm. Han Li was given a massive fright at the sight of the oncoming attack. Regardless of how powerful these translucent swords were, just the sheer quantity of them was enough to strike fear into one's heart. Furthermore, these flying swords had been transformed from the ice feathers of a 10th-grade Ice Phoenix, so there was no way that they would be lacking in power. Han Li didn't have much time to think. Not only did he not stop, he accelerated even further instead. At the same time, over 100 golden swords and a dense horde of crimson fire ravens shot forth toward those translucent swords. A series of resounding booms erupted as golden and white light shimmered and intertwined. Balls of crimson flames exploded one after another amid the vast expanse of white glacial chi, as the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword and fire ravens were able to keep the flying swords at bay. With this split second of delay, the azure streak of light that Han Li had transformed into shot past the center of the hall, heading straight toward the platform in the corner. The Ice Phoenix was rather taken aback. It didn't think that its attack wouldn't even be able to delay Han Li in the slightest. However, this demon beast was far more resentful toward cultivators using celestial ice flames than anyone could imagine. It had already equated Han Li with that man it had encountered in the past, and as killing intent welled up in its heart, its massive body began to blur, creating three avatars that were completely identical to its true body. Two of them immediately flew toward the three North Night Palace cultivators, while the third spread open its ice wings, upon which brilliant white light erupted before it disappeared on the spot. Han Li was naturally also keeping an eye on what the demon beast was doing, and his heart jolted upon seeing that. He immediately forced himself to an abrupt halt and stopped in midair. At this point, he was only just over 1,000 feet from the teleportation formations. He didn't want to accidentally plunge into the mouth of that Ice Phoenix that had just disappeared in a moment of carelessness. He rubbed his hands together with a dark expression before raising them both at the same time. The sound of thunderclaps erupted as several tens of golden lightning arcs shot forth from his palms, each of which was around as thick as a thumb. The arcs of lightning unfurled to create a golden net that encompassed an area that 200 to 300 feet in radius with Han Li at its very center. Almost at the exact same moment, roughly 100 feet away from Han Li, the space there warped and twisted before the Ice Phoenix emerged amid a burst of white light. A ferocious look appeared on Han Li's face as he made a hand seal. All of the golden arcs of lightning shuddered before immediately converging toward the demon beast. The Ice Phoenix was slightly surprised to see this, but it wasn't flustered in the slightest as it opened its sharp beak. A gust of white gale-force winds erupted from its mouth, which howled through the air, causing the golden net to be knocked off course and preventing it from descending. The golden net was then torn apart by the powerful winds and disappeared moments later. Han Li was astonished to see this, and hurriedly tried to bring out the 8-spirit ruler that he was hiding up his sleeve. However, the Ice Phoenix took the initiative this time as it spread open its wings and flapped them violently toward Han Li. The sound of howling wind and explosive thunder erupted as a vast expanse of white glacial flames appeared in the air. The glacial flames took a split second to condense, before transforming into a massive wave over 300 feet tall that came crashing down toward Han Li. As for the ice phoenix itself, it had already dove headfirst into the white glacial chi. Its enormous body then disappeared into the glacial chi amid a burst of white light, nowhere to be seen. Han Li's lips twitched upon seeing this as blue light flashed through his eyes. He raised a hand to summon a ball of purple flames, which he hurriedly hurled in front of him. A spluttering sound rang out as purple flames rose into the air, positioning itself in front of Han Li. The glacial wave struck the purple apex flames barrier without any reservation. The white and purple glacial flames clashed and intertwined. They were both glacial flames, but they were completely intolerant toward one another, like water meeting fire. However, it was quite clear that the white glacial flames were far more powerful than the purple apex flames. Moments later, the purple flame barrier began to tremor violently before falling toward Han Li. Han Li's expression darkened further upon seeing this as he gritted his teeth. The eight-spirit ruler in his sleeve abruptly disappeared, while he pressed his palms against the purple barrier of flames. All of a sudden, it was as if all of the purple flames over his body had found a vent as they surged over his arms and into the barrier in a frenzy. In the blink of an eye, the falling purple barrier was righted once again. However, right at this moment, a white light flashed within the massive wave as a pair of talons that were over a foot in length appeared from the glacial flames, grabbing down toward Han Li's arms like lightning. The talons were shimmering with glacial light, and Han Li could tell that they were extremely powerful just by looking at them. Even though Han Li had cultivated the bright jade arts in the past, if those talons were allowed to strike their targets, his arms would be permanently disabled for sure. However, Han Li seemed to have anticipated this attack in advance. All of a sudden, two clumps of azure threads shot forth from his sleeves, managing to keep the shaped talons at bay. Azure light then flashed as the threads rapidly wound themselves around the pair of talons, locking them firmly in place. A faint cry of surprise sounded from within the glacial flames. However, what transpired next was even more astonishing. In the air several tens of feet above Han Li, white light suddenly flashed as a spatial rift was torn open. A translucent beak half a foot in length emerged from the spatial right before pecking down toward Han Li's head like lightning. In the face of a surprise attack from such a close range, even if Han Li were able to react in time, there was simply not enough time for evasion. Furthermore, he had been focused entirely on the glacial flames in front of him and hadn't set up any defensive measures. However, what was strange was that even as the beak was about to pierce through the layer of purple flames over his body, his expression remained completely unchanged, and he didn't even raise his head. A loud thump erupted as a silver first appeared, seemingly from thin air, before slamming into the beak. Silver light flashed during the clash, and the beak was knocked off course by several feet. Spiritual light then flashed beside the beak as an azure figure emerged, in the process of withdrawing a silver fist. This was none other than the humanoid puppet. As soon as Han Li realized that a clash with the Ice Phoenix was inevitable, he had instructed the humanoid puppet to protect him, which was why it was able to divert that lethal attack just in the nick of time. After having its surprise attack thwarted, the sharp beak immediately disappeared. The white glacial flames before Han Li suddenly shrank back before converging to form the body of that 10th grade Ice Phoenix. At this point, the demon beast was only around 20 to 30 feet in size, significantly downsized from its original stature. It looked down at the azure threads binding its talons and harumphed coldly. Its talons suddenly expanded in size by severalfold as it attempted to struggle free from the threads. However, azure light flashed over the surface of the threads, and they remained firmly in place, despite the Ice Phoenix's best efforts. A hint of surprise flashed through the Ice Phoenix's eyes upon seeing this. However, it then abruptly opened its mouth to blast out two blinding streaks of white light, which circled around its talons. As the white streaks of light flashed through the air, the azure threads were severed like wilted grass. Only then did the white light pause in the air and reveal their true form. They were two small white swords that were emanating faint glacial light. Myriad-year profound jade. Han Li immediately recognized the material that the two flying swords have been crafted from. At the same time, his brows furrowed with concern. Those azure threads were a manifestation of the light shimmering on the surface of the heaven-void cauldron in his sleeve. It appeared that even divine spirit treasure wouldn't be able to do anything to a 10th grade demon beast if he couldn't unleash the treasure's full power. However, he had no intention of engaging in a prolonged battle with this opponent. All he had to do was to travel a further 1,000 feet or so, upon which he would be able to flee into one of the two smaller teleportation formations that would take him away from this place. Just as this thought flashed through Han Li's mind, the Ice Phoenix spread open its ice wings again, as if it were going to attack. Han Li's expression darkened as the purple flames over his body receded, and his body also blurred before splitting into three. Thus, three identical projections appeared, all of which were completely azure in color, so there was no way to identify which one was Han Li's true body. The Ice Phoenix was surprised to see this, and the white light shimmering along its wings immediately faltered. Right at this moment, the three projections transforming into three streaks of azure light and fled in different directions. All of them were traveling so quickly that they were covering over 100 feet in the blink of an eye. On the other side, the golden flying swords and fire ravens that were engaged in battle with the hundreds of translucent flying swords also abruptly flew away, heading straight for the teleportation platform in the corner of the hall. The Ice Phoenix faltered slightly upon seeing this before flying into a thunderous rage. It let loose a sharp cry as white light flashed over its body, which shrank drastically, transforming it into a young woman who appeared to be just over 20 years of age in the blink of an eye. This was a woman in silver palatial robes, with the beauty of a celestial maiden. As soon as the transforming was complete, the woman immediately patted the spirit beast pouch hanging from her waist, upon which a hissing sound erupted from within. Two balls of white light shot forth before spinning through the air, transforming into a pair of pristine white centipedes, each with 4 wings on their backs. Their emergence summoned 2 bursts of bone-chilling winds. The centipedes were each over 10 feet in length and had an extremely sinister appearance. These were 2 6-winged frost centipedes that had already evolved to the 4-winged stage. Han Li turned to glance back over his shoulder and was abruptly given a massive fright upon seeing this. Before he had a chance to devise a course of action, the 2 4-winged centipedes spread their wings open in unison, upon which both of them abruptly disappeared amid the sound of something hurtling through the air. In the next instant, one of the centipedes emerged beside Han Li's true body, while the other appeared near one of his projections. Both of them opened their mouths and blasted out bursts of white glacial chi from within. Han Li naturally wasn't going to allow himself to be struck by this glacial chi. Thus, he adjusted his trajectory slightly to easily evade the attack. However, the other projection continued onward robotically along a set trajectory, only to be vanquished into nothingness by the glacial chi rushing toward it. The silver-robed woman swept her hand through the air before her expressionlessly upon seeing this. A white spatial rift opened up before her as a result. The fact that she was able to tear open space with such ease was another indication of her power. Her body then swayed into the spatial rift as she, along with the rift, both disappeared. Meanwhile, Han Li was fleeing with all his might and had already reached the air directly above the platform. After evading another blast of glacial chi from the 4-winged centipede, he began to descend at full speed. However, right at this moment, white light flashed nearby and the silver-robed woman appeared from thin air. Her body then flashed over to the platform, where she looked up at Han Li with a pair of frosty eyes. Han Li's heart sank upon seeing this. He didn't dare to force his way into the teleportation formation, as an attack launched from outside the formation, while he teleported, could result in catastrophic consequences. Han Li glowered at the silver-robed woman with a dark expression, and said coldly, "I'm not a North Night Palace cultivator, and nor do I have a vendetta against the demon beasts. Do you really insist on fighting me to the death? HMPH, I don't care who you are. Anyone who has inherited fairy ice souls, celestial ice flames, is a sworn enemy of the Ice Phoenixes. You're not getting away from me." A frosty expression appeared on the silver-robed woman's face. She was not backing down in the slightest. At the height of his rage, Han Li burst into laughter and said, "You sure are one to talk. Do you really think you can stop me just because you possess spatial powers? If you're determined to battle me, then I won't hold back either. Let me see if you have the power to back up that big mouth of yours." He raised a hand, and all of the golden swords and fire ravens immediately began to circle around him. Sword chi and crimson flames swirled amid bursts of resounding booms, creating an astonishing spectacle to behold. At the same time, silver light flashed beside Han Li as the expressionless humanoid puppet emerged. He then patted his storage pouch, and a pitch-black vial emerged. upon which he cast several celestial techniques onto the vial. The vial immediately shuddered before 5 bursts of gray-white chi emerged from within. 5 sets of skeletons then began to take shape, all of which had shimmering green flames in their eye sockets. A burst of unsettling screeching rang out from the 5 devils' mouth as all of them turned to appraise the Ice Phoenix with bloodlust in their eyes. The unbroken Sync devils. The Ice Phoenix's expression stiffened momentarily upon seeing this. She then took a glance at the humanoid puppet beside Han Li, and her expression became even grimmer. After a brief silence, the woman said in a slow voice, "Since when did cultivators of the human world gain the ability to refine puppets of this caliber? With that puppet and the 5 devils by your side, it would indeed be rather unlikely for me to be able to kill you even if I were to summon my other 2 avatars to assist me. However, I'm confident in my ability to force you to remain here. If you're not afraid of mishaps during teleportation, then you can give it a shot." And Li didn't even have to turn around to assess the situation, as he could sense what was going on at the center of the hall using his spiritual sense. As such, he sneered, "Summon your avatars. Without you there to control them, your avatars are most likely already struggling with self-preservation against those 3 North Night Palace cultivators. Let me see how long you can last against the 5 devils and this puppet." Letter 1D4 F, letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D486, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A. Letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. Indeed, those 2 Ice Phoenix avatars were clearly inferior in power to the 3 North Night Palace cultivators, and had been forced firmly onto the back foot. If it weren't for the fact that those 2 avatars were also capable of using glacial flames, they would most likely have been destroyed long ago. Even so, they were still only barely holding on. The Palace Master even had the spare capacity to watch Han Li's battle as she fought the 2 avatars. Her expression was very indecisive as she looked on from afar, but she had no intention of lending Han Li her assistance. It appeared that she was using Han Li to divert the main body of the Ice Phoenix away, while they slew these 2 avatars. Han Li wasn't very angry about this. After all, if he were in her shoes, he would most likely do the exact same thing. Upon hearing Han Li's words, the silver-robed woman merely chuckled coldly, seemingly completely undeterred by Han Li's threats. Han Li heaved a faint sigh and finally relinquished any attempt to settle this with words. He made a hand seal and prepared to attack the Ice Phoenix with both his puppet and his 5 devils. Only by severely wounding or killing this woman would he be able to teleport away without fear of interference. However, right at this moment, a peculiar look suddenly flashed through her eyes. It seemed to be a mixture of surprise and relief. Han Li's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this. Before he could identify why such an expression would appear on her face, the space around him suddenly dimmed as a familiar, sinister voice sounded. "Get in here, you little brat." As soon as the voice fell, a layer of gray light surfaced around him, and the surrounding scenery began to blur. Han Li's heart jolted with shock as he immediately whipped a sleeve through the air. The Worldbreaker talisman abruptly shot forth, and the surrounding scenery returned to normal following a flash of yellow light. At the same time, the golden swords and fire ravens around Han Li were sent flying downward. A series of resounding booms erupted as the gray light was completely vanquished. Only after raising his head did Han Li discover that the massive myriad demon flag had somehow appeared several hundred feet in the air above him. The gray light raining down from the flag was descending straight toward his head. Thankfully, he hadn't completely exhausted the power of the Worldbreaker talisman when he had first escaped from the myriad demon flag. Otherwise, he would have been in a lot of trouble. Even so, his expression had become very strained. It was not going to be anywhere near an easy task for him to escape now. Han Li was naturally unwilling to be enshrouded under the myriad demon flag. As such, he immediately pointed a finger toward the 5 devils while chanting to activate his devil control arts. The 5 devils rose into the sky, and as silver light flashed, the 5 skeletons combined to form a single massive skeleton over 300 feet tall. Green light then flashed within the skeleton's eye sockets as it reached out with its bony hands. 2 of its ribs also flew out from its body, and instantly transformed into 2 bone blades each over 100 feet in length. It then tilted its head back and let loose an almighty roar before grabbing the 2 rib bone blades and violently slashing them through the air. A cross-shaped blade of radiance swept through the air, shimmering with astonishing glacial light as it hurtled toward the massive flag upon above. In the process, it sliced through all of the silver light descending from above before striking the myriad demon flag. An earth-shattering boom erupted as demonic chi and glacial light intertwined with one another. The massive skeleton then abruptly rose into the air and slashed its twin sabers wildly through the air. A series of crescent-shaped streaks of glacial light were unleashed as it attempted to destroy the massive flag in one fell swoop. Old Devil Chi's enraged roar rang out from within the myriad demon flag as the fault instantly began to shrink, reducing itself to only around a foot in size in the blink of an eye. The small child emerged in a flash before grabbing onto the flag. His body then swayed as he instantly teleported several hundred feet away. At its massive size, the myriad demon flag was very cumbersome to move around and also presented a huge target for the giant skeleton's twin blades. Old Devil Chi is clearly also aware of this, so he decided to revert the flag back to its original size. Upon seeing this, the massive white skeleton also began to shrink amid a cloud of gray-white Devil Chi. In the end, it shrank down to only around 20 feet tall before letting loose an unsettling screech. Gray-white Devil Chi came spilling out of its mouth as it wielded the minimized bone blades, rushing directly toward the small child. The unbroken Sync Devils were proving to be quite a headache for the small child as well. Due to the special refinement method used to create the 5 devils, they were immune to the restrictive effect of the myriad demon flag. Furthermore, unless he had a specialized devil taming treasure, or if he could kill their owner, the 5 devils were almost unkillable no matter how many times they were shattered or destroyed. They would simply be able to respawn again. The myriad demon flag was an extremely powerful treasure, but only when applied to human cultivators. In the face of these powerful devils, it really wasn't very effective at all. Even if he could take care of these devils through his own power, it would definitely require quite a lengthy process. In the face of the oncoming skeleton, Old Devil Chi could only furrow his brows and use his myriad demon flag to unleash bursts of inky black demonic chi, attempting to keep the skeleton at bay. However, 60% of his spiritual sense was focused on Han Li, leaving only 40% focused on dealing with the 5 devils. At this moment, Han Li was standing shoulder to shoulder with his humanoid puppet. His expression was very dark and indecisive, and he remained standing on the spot. The silver-robed woman was also standing firmly on the platform, seemingly without any intention of attacking him. It appeared that she wished for this impasse to continue, or perhaps she was afraid that if she were to move, Han Li would be able to sneak around her and escape using the teleportation formation. As for the 2 four-winged centipedes, they were hovering over the 2 smaller teleportation formations while appraising Han Li with threatening looks. This ice phoenix knew that the 2 teleportation formations were the only ways out of the hall. In contrast, the reason that Han Li wasn't initiating an attack was very simple. He was rather wary of the Ice Phoenix's spatial manipulation abilities. He had many tricks up his sleeve himself, but he was struggling to think of a way to force back this demon beast before escaping safely from this place. However, right at this moment, a burst of wild cackling suddenly erupted from the center of the hall behind him. "Haha, I've finally come out. I'm going to have some fun this time. You promised me you wouldn't make me go back until I've had my fun." The cackling voice sounded like a female one, but it was extremely coarse and unpleasant to listen to. Han Li faltered slightly before sweeping his spiritual sense behind him, upon which a surprised look appeared on his face. The palace master, who was originally battling the 2 Ice Phoenix avatars, suddenly abandoned that battlefield to rush toward Han Li. The 2 elderly men were left behind to take care of the Ice Phoenix avatars. Behind the woman was a cloud of dark green yin chi that followed her like a shadow. There was an indistinct female figure swirling within the green chi, and the cackling had also erupted from there. Han Li could sense that the woman in this cloud of ghostly chi possessed extremely powerful yin energy, and was another late-nascent soul cultivator. However, the yin energy emanating from her body suggested that she was an extremely powerful ghost cultivator. "Don't worry, fellow Taoist Han, I won't allow them to gang up on you. I'm here to lend you my assistance," the palace master said. Han Li was a little speechless upon hearing this. This woman was clearly just afraid that he would be slain by these 2 demon beasts before they turned on the North Night Palace. However, she was making it sound as if she were joining this battle solely to help him. From the very beginning, these 10th grade demon cultivators had been targeting the North Night Palace. However, Han Li was rather surprised by the fact that the woman was able to immediately identify him, and he certainly wasn't going to object to her help. Having two late nascent soul cultivators joining him in battle would be a brilliant turn of events. Even though this palace master was far weaker than these two demons, the ghost cultivator within the cloud of green chi was far more powerful and struck Han Li with an immense sense of pressure. She was most likely at the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage. Upon catching sight of the woman in the green chi, the small child who was battling the huge skeleton suddenly cried, "Infernal ghost mother, don't go poking your nose into my business." An extremely unpleasant burst of cackling escaped from the woman's mouth as she retorted fearlessly, "Hee, if your true body were here, then I naturally wouldn't dare to intervene, but you're just a mere avatar. What are you going to do? Eat me?" Infernal ghost mother, you're that ghost cultivator who destroyed several cultivator sects on your own. The silver-robed woman's expression also changed slightly upon hearing this name. She was clearly also aware of who this woman was. "It's an honor that the master of the glacial sea has heard of my name. Even back when my body had first disintegrated, I had heard that you possess the power to progress to the deity transformation stage. The fact that you're still only at the 10th grade must be because you're afraid of creating an imbalance in the human world's origin chi, thereby inflicting backlash on yourself. But restricting your own cultivation base like this must be a very bad feeling. Besides, even though you ice phoenixes have extremely long lifespans, you shouldn't be able to live much longer if you don't progress." The woman in the ghostly chi seemed to be very familiar with this 10th grade ice phoenix and had just revealed her the biggest secret in her heart. The silver-robed woman's expression immediately darkened. In contrast, Han Li drew a sharp breath in shock. He finally understood why this ice phoenix was so difficult to deal with. The palace master suddenly harumphed coldly and said, "I didn't release you so you could catch up with some old friends. Don't worry, I can easily ensure your survival as long as there aren't any deity transformation cultivators around. But don't forget what you promised me. Also, you forcibly summoned me even though you didn't have any spirit stones. After this, Yin Qi is going to enter your body, and you're inevitably going to suffer a severe illness as a result." The infernal ghost mother cackled. The palace master's expression darkened upon hearing this, but she didn't say anything in response. In the blink of an eye, the palace master and the infernal ghost mother had reached the platform, where they faced off against the two demon beasts by Han Li's side. The palace master turned to Han Li with an amicable expression and suggested, "Brother Han, what do you say we join forces and get rid of this ice phoenix first?" "I've got no objections to that." Han Li stroked his chin and nodded in response. The palace master was ecstatic to hear this, yet just as she was about to attack with the infernal ghost mother, the silver-robed woman down below suddenly chuckled coldly before unleashing a streak of white light. Following a resounding boom, one of the small teleportation formations was sliced cleanly in half. Both Han Li and the palace master's expressions changed drastically upon seeing this. "If you're planning to gang up on me, then I'm going to destroy this formation as well," the silver-robed woman threatened. The palace master forcibly calmed herself down before asking, "Why would you do that? If you destroy that teleportation formation, then none of you will be able to leave the Spirit Void Hall either. Have you forgotten how I managed to infiltrate the Spirit Void Hall in the first place?" The silver-robed woman chuckled coldly. Han Li's expression was slightly strained. The palace master contemplated the situation momentarily before turning to Han Li as she said, "There's no need to pay any heed to her threats, fellow Taoist Han. Even if this accursed beast really does destroy the teleportation formation, we can join forces to break through the restriction and exit through the main gate of the hall. It will take some time, but it definitely can be done." Han Li's brows furrowed as an indecisive look appeared over his face. If he hadn't killed those 3 North Night Palace cultivators in the profound Jade Cave, then he could naturally join forces with the Palace Master to kill these demon beasts first before breaking through the restriction to escape this place. However, that was clearly a course of action that would take a long time, and by then, the North Night Palace cultivators would have definitely discovered the situation in the profound Jade Cave. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. The Palace Master was initially slightly perplexed by Han Li's expression before a thought suddenly occurred to her. Han Li had appeared before her, yet none of the other nascent soul cultivators that he had entered the profound Jade Cave with had re-emerged. That had already struck her with a sense of foreboding. However, in the face of such powerful enemies, she could only pretend to be oblivious to the situation. A decisive light suddenly flashed through her eyes as her lips tremored, as if she were transmitting her voice. The infernal ghost mother behind her suddenly flashed within the cloud of green mist, and her body abruptly became blurry and insubstantial. Immediately thereafter, a thin green thread shot forth soundlessly from within the mist before disappearing in the blink of an eye. Even though the green thread was traveling in an extremely stealthy manner, the ice phoenix down below still caught on to the fact that something was amiss as she let loose a sharp cry. "Don't you dare!" She then flicked her fingers toward the other smaller teleportation formation, sending 5 bursts of white sword chi hurtling toward it. At the same time, the four-winged centipede in the air above that formation also abruptly lowered its head, blasting out a cloud of white glacial chi that completely enshrouded the teleportation formation within. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon seeing this. A loud thunderclap erupted from behind him, upon which he disappeared as an arc of lightning. On the other side, green light flashed in front of the teleportation formation that was being attacked, and a murky green woman appeared. It was none other than the infernal ghost mother. In the face of the surging sword chi and glacial chi, the infernal ghost mother cackled before launching her palms toward the oncoming attacks. She did so in an extremely gentle manner, as if she were merely absent-mindedly pressing her hands against the air rather than offering up any retaliation. The 5 bursts of sword chi abruptly shattered and crumbled, before disappearing into nothingness around 10 feet away. As for the glacial chi descending from above, it seemed to have been impeded by some type of invisible force before being swept backward, forcing the four-winged centipede into a frenzied defense. Right at this moment, silver light flashed as Han Li appeared within the smaller teleportation formation. He immediately raised a hand without any hesitation to launch a celestial technique into the edge of the formation, then made a hand seal as he quickly chanted something in a low voice. Almost at the exact same moment, a humanoid figure appeared from behind him as the humanoid puppet unleashed countless flaming arrows with its red bow, which came raining down on the silver-robed woman like a torrential storm. Meanwhile, a crimson light suddenly flashed in the eye sockets of Skeleton, which was attacking the small child with all its might, and it suddenly reverted back into 5 ghostly heads without any premonition. Those 5 ghostly heads then tumbled through the air and disappeared in unison. In the next instant, 5 bursts of gray-white chi appeared above Han Li's head before transforming into 5 ghostly heads once again. They had been forcibly summoned back by Han Li. At this moment, white light began to flash from the entire formation. Han Li stood at the center of the formation, staring intently at the silver-robed woman with a grave look on his face. Everything had happened in the blink of an eye. Han Li's actions had clearly taken both the palace master and the silver-robed woman by surprise. The palace master's expression changed drastically as she hurtled through the air as a streak of silver light. At the same time, she let loose a loud cry, "Destroy the formation, don't let him get away." Even though she wasn't making it very specific whom she was referring to, it was quite clear that she was directing her words toward Han Li. After all, regardless of whether Han Li had actually killed the North Night Palace cultivators in the profound Jade Cave, the palace master required his assistance in this battle. If he were to leave, even with the help of the infernal ghost mother, she wouldn't be able to take on these 2 powerful demon beasts at once. Upon hearing this, the infernal ghost mother cackled as she opened her mouth before swooping down toward the teleportation formation, seemingly preparing to unleash some kind of attack. However, right at this moment, Han Li suddenly raised an arm, and a green wooden ruler appeared in his hand. A silver lotus then began to blossom as 7-colored Buddhist light surged toward her. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D55E. That's a Buddhist. The infernal ghost mother's confident expression gave way to one of horror as she let loose a sharp scream. Her body then disappeared on the spot as a flash of green light, as if she were a cat that had just had its tail trodden on. At this moment, white light was glowing from the entire formation. The palace master was flying toward the formation as quickly as she could, but she clearly wasn't going to be able to get there in time. A hint of elation appeared on Han Li's face, but his expression soon changed drastically as he caught sight of the silver-robed woman tearing open a spatial rift before disappearing on the spot. Han Li's heart sank upon seeing this, but he was prepared well in advance, and countless golden swords shot forth from his body, making him appear as if he were a golden hedgehog. If that 10th-grade ice phoenix dared to appear near the formation, she would definitely have to contend with these swords first, thereby rendering her unable to prevent Han Li from getting away. However, much to his surprise, the silver-robed woman didn't appear close to the formation he was situated in. Instead, she appeared in the air above the larger teleportation formation over 200 feet away. A cold smile appeared on her face as piercing white light emanated from her body. At the same time, she feigned a grabbing motion toward Han Li from afar. A burst of spatial fluctuations appeared above Han Li's head, following which a massive transparent curtain of light surfaced before slowly descending toward him. Han Li's expression darkened as he unleashed his spiritual sense. All of the golden sword chi on his body changed direction in unison and flew toward the air up above. Thus, blinding golden light instantly flashed in the air above as the sword chi intertwined with one another. However, a peculiar scene then ensued. As the golden sword chi struck the transparent film of light, they passed right through as if they had struck nothing more than an illusion. Han Li's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and he immediately tried to use his 8-spirit ruler to ward off this film of light. In the distance, the silver-robed woman's face paled as she brought her 5 fingers together before slowly pulling her hand toward her, as if she were trying to drag an extremely heavy object her way. The film of light in the air immediately disappeared, but it appeared right in front of Han Li in the next instant, encompassing the entire teleportation formation within. A sense of foreboding welled up in Han Li's heart. Yet before he had a chance to react, he heard a ringing sound as the white light around him began to flash wildly. In the next instant, Han Li disappeared from the teleportation formation. The unbroken sink devils and the humanoid puppet also vanished along with him. The entire teleportation formation was suddenly empty, and the white light was naturally also snuffed out. The palace master's heart sank upon seeing this. She stopped cold in her tracks before turning to the silver-robed woman with an expression of shock and wariness, trying to figure out what was happening. However, the silver-robed woman was still dragging something toward her. Her cheeks were heavily flushed, and white light was flashing wildly over her body, clearly indicating that she was expending a lot of effort. Upon seeing this, the palace master no longer hesitated. She raised a hand, and around a dozen or so streaks of silver light flashed through the air, transforming into a series of extremely sharp silver nails that hurtled straight toward the silver-robed woman. The Ice Phoenix was greatly enraged upon seeing this. She had forced her body beyond its limits to unleash that secret technique. Even with her inherent spatial aptitude, that was still a secret technique that she should have only been able to unleash after reaching the deity transformation stage. However, Han Li was about to get away, and in her moment of urgency, she forcibly unleashed the technique. Now that the palace master was launching an attack against her, there was no way for her to maintain the technique while defending herself, so she could only release what she was pulling and swing it into the ground below her. A resounding boom erupted amid a flash of white light. Han Li, the puppet, and the unbroken sink devils appeared in the large teleportation formation, while the white light was snuffed out in a flash. Han Li's body swayed slightly, seemingly still recovering from the dizziness brought on by spatial teleportation. However, the silver-robed woman had already unleashed a shimmering blue robe to ward off the silver nails before whipping both of her sleeves downward. All of a sudden, translucent flying swords came surging forth in a frenzy, seemingly with no end to their vast numbers, encompassing Han Li's entire body and leaving him with no avenue for escape or retreat. Han Li steadied himself before raising his head and opening his mouth, upon which an antiquated little cauldron emerged from within. The cauldron spun in the air before countless thin azure threads flew forth from its surface, intertwining with one another to form a massive net that shielded Han Li below. At the same time, the ghostly heads that were the unbroken sink devils began to screech incessantly, blasting gray-white devil chi out of their mouths. They broke through the white light and rose into the air while the humanoid puppet also disappeared. At this moment, the small child had been freed from his battle against the 5 devils and unleashed his myriad demon flag again. The flag swelled drastically in size once again as demonic chi tumbled in the air around it. A series of pitch-black demon beast projections were being manifested by the flag, and they appeared to be close to taking on a substantial form. However, Han Li paid this no heed as he spread open his thunderstorm wings again, attempting to rush back to the small teleportation formation. Even though he had missed the best opportunity to teleport away from this place, he still had to gain control over the teleportation formation in order to prevent it from being destroyed by others. However, just as Han Li thought that he would have to engage in a battle with the two demon beasts as well as the North Night Palace cultivators again, an unexpected turn of events suddenly struck. Heaven Void Cauldron that was blasting out countless strands of azure thread suddenly shuddered violently, despite no instructions from Han Li for it to do so. Immediately thereafter, it began to emanate scintillating azure light, following which Han Li immediately lost his spiritual connection with the cauldron. The azure threads that were meant to ward off the swords descended from above suddenly disappeared into the large teleportation formation that Han Li was standing in. A loud rumbling boom then erupted from the large teleportation formation as azure spiritual light shimmered over the entire formation. A film of azure light also appeared, encompassing Han Li and the unbroken sink devils within. That's the Heaven Void Cauldron. An incredulous look appeared on the palace master's face as she immediately diverted her attention away from the silver-robed woman. She turned to the teleportation formation that Han Li was standing in and flicked her all 10 fingers at it in a frenzy, as if she had lost her sanity. 10 streaks of piercing silver light instantly shot forth. The silver-robed woman above the teleportation formation was also extremely shocked to see this. She didn't know where the teleportation formation was going to take Han Li, but she naturally didn't want to let him get away. Thus, all of the countless translucent swords in the air came crashing down from above at her behest. However, the azure film of light enshrouding the teleportation formation was seemingly indestructible. The 10 silver streaks of light and hundreds of translucent swords came crashing down upon it, but didn't even create so much as a ripple on its surface. The palace master and silver-robed woman were both flabbergasted upon seeing this. Not only them, but even Han Li himself was stunned, particularly after he tried and failed to slice open the azure film of light with his golden flying swords. After searching Master Arctic Dragon's nascent soul, if his memory served him correct, then the teleportation formation he was situated in was an ancient one-way teleportation formation that had always been in disuse. He didn't know where this formation led to, and nor did he know how to activate it. However, seeing as it was a one-way teleportation formation, Han Li naturally wasn't willing to take the risk. If he were teleported to a lethal region like the Umbra Realm, he would be in deep trouble. As such, he tried to break free from the azure film of light with all his might upon arriving at the realization that he had been trapped in the teleportation formation. Seeing as the flying swords had failed, Han Li gritted his teeth as a ball of 3-colored light appeared in his hand, quickly revealing itself to be a feather fan. He was going to use the triflame fan to attack this film of light. However, in such close quarters, Han Li naturally didn't dare to use the fan at its full power. Otherwise, he would be swept up in the attack as well. He only waved the fan slightly, and a layer of 3-colored flames appeared on its face, which then crashed into the film of light like a blade of fire. A sizzling sound erupted as the fire made contact with the barrier. As expected, the might of the triflame fan was not to be scoffed at. An incision had been torn into the seemingly indestructible film of light, and even though it was only around a foot in length, it was sufficient in size for Han Li to be able to escape through. Han Li was ecstatic, yet just as he was about to rush out of teleportation formation when white light suddenly flashed from the gash that he had just inflicted. The silver-robed woman had torn through space and appeared outside. She raised a hand, and one of her arms transformed into a sharp and translucent talon, forcing its way into the gash as if she were trying to drag Han Li out from within. Han Li was struck by a sense of urgency upon seeing this. He wanted to leave this teleportation formation, but he didn't want to fall into the grasp of this 10th-grade Ice Phoenix as a result. Just as he was about to attack his assailant with his triflame fan, his expression suddenly changed drastically. He put away the triflame fan in his hand, but it was replaced by a shimmering blue medallion. That medallion was none other than the greater teleportation medallion. As soon as Han Li produced the medallion, spiritual light erupted from within the ancient teleportation formation. At the same time, the azure film of light began to crumble. After the light faded, Han Li and the unbroken sink devils within the film of light disappeared, as did the silver-robed woman, who was originally standing at the edge of the teleportation formation. It appeared that she had been teleported away with Han Li. The palace master faltered initially upon seeing this before a mixture of elation and vexation appeared on her face. She was overjoyed that a powerful enemy had been teleported away, but very frustrated by the fact that the spirit treasure carried by the matriarch of North Night Palace, Fair Ice Soul, had appeared and disappeared right under her nose. In the distance, the small child wore an extremely dark expression. A vicious light flashed through his eyes as he glowered at the palace master before letting loose a long howl that punctured the clouds. He then abruptly pointed up at the myriad demon flag in the air, upon which the demonic chi surging from the flag immediately swelled by severalfold. Countless demonic projections of different sizes then began to surge forth in a frenzy, encompassing a large section of the hall in tumbling demonic chi which rushed toward the palace master. The palace master's expression changed upon seeing this, but green light suddenly flashed before her as the infernal ghost mother positioned herself in front of her. She looked up at the countless demonic projections in the sky, and a cold smile appeared on her face. She spun around on the spot, sending a vast expanse of green chi sweeping forth in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding area had been transformed into an infernal hell amid ghastly wails and bone-chilling cries. A vast expanse of yin chi that was not inferior in quantity compared to the demonic chi in the sky spread along the ground before sweeping upward as a series of massive waves. The green mist and black chi clashed and intertwined with one another. Demonic projections and ghostly beings could be indistinctly seen within, engaged in a heated battle. This infernal ghost mother was able to combat old devil chi's avatar with her body as a ghost cultivator, and she was not being forced onto the back foot. The palace master was ecstatic upon seeing this. She immediately set aside the matter regarding Han Li and rubbed her hands together before raising them up in the air, up in which balls of crimson lightning flames were sent crashing toward the demonic chi overhead. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 212F. Letter 1D624, letter 1D45C, letter 1D628. Loud rumbling booms rang out incessantly within the hall as the woman, the demon, and the ghost all disappeared within the vast expanse of demonic and ghostly chi. Only the occasional earth-shattering clash could be heard from the outside. Within a stone chamber that was over 300 feet in size, there was a formation that was quite similar to the teleportation formation located in the Spirit Void Hall. Han Li supported the Heaven Void Cauldron with one hand as he faced off completely expressionlessly with an exquisite beauty. The humanoid puppet behind him was completely stationary, yet the ghostly heads that were the 5 devils were hovering in the air, looking at the woman with bloodlust in their eyes. They would let loose a low snarl from time to time, looking as if they would immediately pounce on the woman as soon as Han Li gave the command. The woman standing before Han Li was naturally the 10th grade ice phoenix that had been accidentally swept up into the teleportation formation. In reality, this ice phoenix was rather unlucky. She had sensed that something was amiss when the azure film of light was shattered, and she immediately tried to tear open space to get away from the formation. However, to her surprise, the spatial powers she unleashed resonated with the spatial powers in the formation, thereby sucking into the teleportation sequence as well. It was quite clear that this wasn't some kind of short-distance teleportation. If it weren't for the fact that she was extremely proficient at spatial manipulation, she would have most likely been torn into pieces by the spatial power on the way here. Even so, her situation was clearly not very optimistic. She was currently standing in one corner of the stone chamber with white spiritual light flashing all over her body as she glowered coldly at Han Li. According to her estimation, if she were to engage in a battle to the death with this human cultivator, the win-loss ratio would stand at around 40-60. What was very depressing to her was that her opponent was the one with the 60% chance of securing victory. One had to realize that she had been restricting her cultivation base to the semi-deity transformation stage for a long time, and that if she wanted to, she could have progressed to the deity transformation stage a long time ago. However, this human was one of the most difficult opponents she had ever had to deal with. He possessed power on par with hers even though he was only at the mid-nascent soul stage. Furthermore, he possessed the unbroken sync devils and that untraceable humanoid puppet. Those two were extremely powerful in their own right and could be counted as 2 late nascent stage cultivators. Thus, no matter how arrogant she was, there was no way that she would be optimistic about her chances in battle against Han Li. However, she wasn't fearful toward Han Li either. Even if she couldn't match him in battle, her spatial powers would ensure that she would at least be able to escape. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he looked at the woman before him, and he was also rather indecisive about what to do. A short while later, he finally harumphed coldly as he raised a foot into the air, upon which he hovered out of the formation and made his way straight over to one of the bluestone walls of the stone chamber. This stone chamber was rather peculiar. There wasn't a single door to be seen, and the stone walls were extremely smooth with not even so much as a hint of a gap to be exploited. In such a strange and unpredictable place, Han Li really had no interest in battling this ice phoenix. As long as she didn't attack him, he couldn't be bothered to engage in a battle with her that would sure expend a lot of magic power. After all, her spatial powers were also very difficult for him to deal with. Upon seeing what Han Li was doing, the silver-robed woman's expression changed as she heaved an internal sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Han Li was already using his spiritual sense to carefully scan over the stone walls. However, what he discovered as a result made his brows furrow with concern. As soon as his spiritual sense seeped into the stone walls, it was repelled by a powerful force. There had clearly been some type of powerful restriction cast on the walls, and this was the worst possible discovery to make. Han Li's expression darkened, and he suddenly stabbed a finger toward the stone wall. Azure light flashed on his fingertip as a glacial light half a foot in length appeared before stabbing into the blue stone. However, only a small section of the glacial light pierced into the wall before it was also repelled. Han Li nonchalantly flicked his fingers and 3 streaks of azure sword chi struck the other 3 walls, only to result in the same effect. Han Li's eyes narrowed as he stared silently at the stone wall. As he did so, a flash of faint blue light shimmered through his eyes. HMPH, the silver-robed woman chuckled coldly upon seeing this. She then waved a hand through the air, and a flash of white light appeared, following which she disappeared from the chamber. She had unleashed her spatial powers to escape from this place. Han Li completely ignored this as he continued to stare silently at the stone wall. All of a sudden, the humanoid puppet behind him suddenly raised a hand, sending a black dagger streaking through the air. The dagger instantly struck a certain nondescript spot on the wall amid a dull thud. The blue stone wall before him suddenly crumbled, and his eyes immediately lit up. He appeared in what seemed to be an empty hall, and the silver-robed woman was still nowhere to be seen. However, upon closer inspection, Han Li's lips twitched as an incredulous look flashed through his eyes. This was a reaction to the stone gate that lay before him, which was square in shape with over 100 feet in both length and width. There were strange runes carved onto the gate, and faint white light was shimmering along its surface, clearly indicating that some type of restriction had been cast on it. However, Han Li was very familiar with this stone gate, and he almost identified it at first glance. He felt as if he had been dealt a heavy blow upon making that realization, and astonishment surged through his heart. After taking a deep breath, Han Li recomposed himself and strode directly toward the stone gate. Golden light flashed as a flying sword that was over a foot in length appeared in his hand. He slashed it through the air, and a streak of golden sword chi flew forth. White light flashed over the surface of the stone gate, but it was still sliced in half by the sword chi amid a resounding boom, revealing an intersection that was paved with bluestone. Han Li's body swayed, and in the next instant, he appeared at the center of the intersection. He hurriedly looked around at his surroundings before his body fell completely stationary. There was a series of bluestone paths leading toward the north, south, east, and west directions. There were identical tall and thick stone walls on either side of the paths, looking as if they had been constructed from the same mold. After a long while, Han Li exhaled and murmured to himself in a forlorn voice, "There's no mistaking it. It really is this place." This place was none other than the massive 5-story bluestone tower, within which he had obtained the heaven-void cauldron. He had been teleported from the northernmost region of the Great Jin to the scattered star seas. From the bluestone paths alone, he was unable to determine which level of the tower he was situated in. So the Heaven Void Hall and Spirit Void Hall really are related, Han Li murmured to himself as his expression finally eased. At his current power level, it wasn't an issue even if he were situated in the scattered star seas. As long as he could make his way out of this hall, then repair the teleportation formation that he had destroyed after it had taken him to the scattered star seas, then he would be able to return directly to the heavenly south region. With that in mind, Han Li examined his surroundings before deciding to take a certain bluestone path, upon which his body shot forth as a streak of azure light. However, after flying for only 10 minutes, Han Li discovered that he hadn't encountered even a single one of those puppet guards that were supposed to roam the tower. Upon further contemplation, he figured out why this was the case. It was still a long time until the next opening of the Heaven Void Hall, so those puppets had most likely been withdrawn by the restriction in the hall for now. Not only that, Han Li wasn't impeded by any other restrictions or traps along the way either. It was as if the tower had been reduced to a completely inanimate object. However, Han Li still underestimated these maze-like paths in the tower. Even though most of the restrictions and puppets had been withdrawn, the restriction on his spiritual sense was still in effect. After taking countless wrong paths, and using his bright-sight spirit eyes to break through countless illusions, he finally entered the teleportation formation on the next level. It was no wonder that Man Husey had forcibly restricted everyone's cultivation bases in the past, thereby forcing them to hold back their arrogant tendencies and obediently follow Zenith Yin's duo. On the way here, Han Li had already put away the unbroken sink devils and the humanoid puppet. He also broke through several stone gates leading to treasure rooms that were yet to be accessed, but he didn't discover any treasures, nor trigger any restrictions that teleported him out of the tower. Perhaps it was due to the fact that he didn't use the Heaven Void map fragment to open the stone gates, or perhaps because the Heaven Void Hall wasn't open yet. In any case, these treasures had been sealed away elsewhere, and even the teleportation restrictions had lost their effect. Han Li was unwilling to give up as he searched carefully through each and every one of the treasure rooms. However, he had to admit that the formation master who had set up the formations in the Heaven Void Hall was far more proficient in the art of formations and restrictions than he could imagine. He clearly knew that there were other mysterious restrictions in these places, but his search still proved to be completely fruitless. As such, he had no choice but to exit the treasure rooms and relinquish his ambition to secure all of the treasures in the Heaven Void Hall in one fell swoop. Even though his efforts thus far had proven to be futile, it was often the case that the most important control formation in a building was situated in its core region. In the case of the Heaven Void Hall, the more important core region in there was naturally the 5th floor. Back when Han Li was last here, Zenith Yin and the others were fearful of the restrictions on that level and only wanted to obtain the Heaven Void Cauldron anyways, so they didn't dare to explore that level. However, with his current cultivation base and his bright-sight spirit eyes, perhaps he could find something useful up there. As for the 10th grade Ice Phoenix, Han Li didn't know where she had teleported herself to, but he wasn't concerned in the slightest that she would have escaped from the tower or even the Heaven Void Hall. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D68T, letter 1D604, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D560, letter 1D46. This was because he had already found one of the outermost walls of the tower, and there he discovered over 10 types of restrictions. He was unable to identify most of the restrictions, but among the few that he did recognize, there just so happened to be a few that restricted spatial powers. Unless she were to use a special teleportation formation within the Heaven Void Hall, it would be impossible to leave this tower through her spatial teleportation abilities. Even at his current cultivation base, he could still sense that the other restrictions on the wall were extremely fearsome and unfathomable. Otherwise, he would have been able to blast his way out of the tower through brute force, rather than have to search for some control formation. After teleporting through 2 levels, Han Li finally reached the 5th level of the tower, and appeared before the frozen Dragona Eurostrade S Terrace, where he had obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron. When he thought about it, he realized that the past Grand Elders of the North Night Palace had always been referred to as Master Arctic Dragon. That was another piece of evidence suggesting that there was a connection between the North Night Palace and the Heaven Void Hall. However, after the Heaven Void Cauldron had been taken, the stairs here had already been ruined, completely preserving the signs of the battle between Zenith Yin, Wan Tianming, and the others. To Han Li's surprise, the silver-robed woman was also standing on the terrace. She was looking at the altar with a contemplative look on her face. Han Li's arrival had clearly drawn her attention. She took a cold glance at Han Li before her body suddenly swayed, transforming into a streak of light that flew away from the terrace, disappearing into one of the many bluestone paths in the blink of an eye. Han Li looked on in silence as she rushed away from the scene. He had no intention of stopping her whatsoever. Only after she had truly disappeared from view did he slowly make his way over to the altar. He took a glance into the cave from which he had obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron before slowly expanding the scope of his search. Perhaps it was due to the fact that the control formation was hidden extremely well, or perhaps Han Li was in the wrong place altogether. In any case, his search proved to be fruitless once again. Days passed one after the other and Han Li had searched through the entire 5th level. His expression grew darker with each passing day, and even after over half a month had flown by, he still hadn't found the control formation. On that day, Han Li made his way out of a certain corner following another fruitless search. He leaned against a pillar nearby and began to space out. Could it be that the control formation of the Heaven Void Hall isn't on this level, but on one of the other 4 levels? Han Li murmured to himself. Just as he was contemplating this possibility, a white light suddenly flashed nearby as the space there was torn upon which the silver-robed woman emerged. Han Li turned his gaze toward her, but didn't say anything. He knew that she wouldn't seek him out for no reason, and he was interested in hearing what she had to say. After all, she hadn't appeared on the 5th level at all during the past few days, so perhaps she had discovered a way out on one of the other levels. "Have you found a way out yet, fellow Taoist Han?" the silver-robed woman asked. "If I have, why would I still remain here? By the sounds of it, you seem to have discovered something." Han Li replied calmly, as if there had never been any conflict between them. "I've searched through this entire place and discovered that it would require the combined powers of at least 2 or 3 deity transformation cultivators to break through the restrictions here by force. There are only 2 of us here, so that's clearly not an option," the silver-robed woman said in a slow voice. "I'm aware of this already." Han Li stirred internally, but still put on an aloof and nonchalant expression. "HMPH, are you not looking for the control formation of this place?" The silver-robed woman was clearly growing rather impatiently, and she harumphed coldly as a frosty look flashed through her eyes. Han Li's expression changed as he admitted, "I am indeed searching for the control formation. Would you happen to know where it is?" The silver-robed woman took a deep breath and her expression abruptly darkened as she said, "That's all I need to hear. I've found the control formation, but leaving this place won't be an easy task. Prior to this, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions first. How is this place related to Fairy Ice Soul, and is that little cauldron in your hand the Heaven Void Cauldron?" "Fairy Ice Soul? Who's that? As for this small cauldron, if you say it's the Heaven Void Cauldron, then I guess that's what it is." Han Li was initially slightly taken aback by these questions before deciding to play dumb. A cold light flashed through the silver-robed woman's eyes upon hearing this, and only after a long while did she explain. "Fairy Ice Soul is the ancient cultivator who created the celestial ice flame, and she's also the matriarch of the North Night Palace. It appears that you really do know nothing about this. As for the Heaven Void Cauldron, let me make this clear to you. If you have the Heaven Void Cauldron, then you'd be able to use it to activate the control formation. If not, then you're completely useless, and there's no point for me to tell you anything." A hint of surprise appeared in Han Li's eyes, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he decided to come clean. "If you put it that way, then I'll admit that this cauldron is indeed the Heaven Void Cauldron. Where is the control formation?" "Good. Seeing as you've admitted to it, you can come with me. If we want to leave this place, then we'll have to join forces this time. Prior to getting out of this place, I suggest we set our differences aside. Otherwise, neither of us would be able to get out of here on our own," the silver-robed woman replied calmly, seemingly completely unsurprised by Han Li's admission. Her body then swayed as she flew toward a certain bluestone path as a streak of light. Han Li's brows furrowed, but he didn't have an opportunity to think too deep into the matter as he transformed into an azure streak of light to follow the silver-robed woman. However, after only flying for a short while, a surprised look appeared on Han Li's face. He discovered that the silver-robed woman was clearly leading him to the Frozen Dragon's Terrace. That was a place that he had searched countless times, all to no avail. However, the silver-robed woman had no intention of stopping, so Han Li could only repress his curiosity as he followed close behind her. After some time, the silver-robed woman finally descended onto the altar on the terrace. After also landing on the terrace, Han Li was finally able to voice his query as he asked, "Are you sure this is the right place, fellow Taoist Phoenix? Is the control formation really here?" "Is this the right place? I can find the control formation here even with my eyes closed," the silver-robed woman scoffed in a disdainful manner. "What do you mean by that? Have you been here before?" Han Li's heart jolted with surprise. "How could I have ever been here? It's just that on the Ice Wave Island where we Ice Phoenixes reside, there's a place that's completely identical to this stone terrace. Come to think of it, the cauldron you have is somewhat connected to our Ice Phoenix race," the silver-robed woman chuckled coldly. Before Han Li could express his surprise upon hearing this, the silver-robed woman suddenly hovered into the air before abruptly pointing to several spots in the air above the altar. The crisp sound of cracking chinaware suddenly rang out in midair, following which several balls of blinding white light appeared. These balls of light shuddered before expanding drastically, reaching the size of half of a wagon wheel in the blink of an eye. They began a flash in the air like scorching white stars before finally combining as one again, transforming into a huge ball of light that began to slowly rotate on the spot. Han Li pursed his lips and made no effort to hide the expression of shock on his face. The silver-robed woman glanced at Han Li out of the corners of her eyes before continuing with what she was doing. Her fingers flashed through the air as she cast one celestial technique after another, all of which disappeared into the ball of light. In the end, a loud boom erupted from the massive ball of light, and it transformed into a dozen or so snowy white formation flags. Each and every one of the flags was roughly 5 to 6 feet in length, with some ancient runes and mysterious patterns embroidered upon them. Those formation flags spun in the air before transforming into streaks of dazzling white light that flew outward, disappearing into the ground without a trace. Han Li's eyes flashed upon seeing this, and a hint of enlightenment appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a loud burst of rumbling erupted from the entire frozen dragon's terrace. A massive formation spell emerged from the center of the altar, and the formation almost encompassed the entire stone terrace, with lights of all colors flashing incessantly over its surface.